My name is Special Agent Nolan Hayes, and I've been working for the FBI's Missing Persons Task Force for 11 years. I've worked on cases from the Mojave Desert to the Appalachian Trail, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I found in the archives on a rainy Thursday in September. That morning, the Seattle field office smelled of burnt coffee and wet concrete. I needed to review old cases for potential DNA retesting, a bureaucratic task that felt like punishment because it involved asking too many questions about interdepartmental protocols. The archive room in the basement was exactly what we expected. Metal shelves stretching into shadows, fluorescent lights buzzing constantly, and boxes upon boxes containing forgotten lives. I wasn't looking for anything specific when I found file number 04WA2847. The corner of the box containing the file was damp, softened, and faded. Inside was a manila folder held together by a rubber band that crumbled when I touched it. The case dated back almost exactly 20 years to October 2004. The missing person was a 34-year-old forestry worker named Miller Dawson, last seen at a forest ranger station in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. What caught my attention wasn't his disappearance. People went missing in that forest every year. What caught my attention were the follow-up reports, or rather, their complete absence after the initial investigation. 3 FBI agents had been assigned to the case. Special Agent Cole Brennan led the team, with 2 junior agents assisting. They'd conducted interviews, searched the last known location, filed preliminary reports. Then, 2 weeks into the investigation, the case was abruptly closed. The official reason: subject likely succumbed to environmental exposure. Recovery deemed unfeasible due to terrain. No body was ever found. But here's what made my skin crawl. Attached to the final report was a handwritten note, barely legible, on a scrap of paper that didn't match any FBI stationery I'd ever seen. It read, "Coordinates are wrong. Always were. Don't go back." The note wasn't signed, but the handwriting analysis stamp in the corner indicated it had been authenticated as belonging to Cole Brennan, the same agent who'd officially closed the case. I pulled Brennan's current status from the system. Retired in 2006, just 2 years after the Dawson case. Living in Bellingham, Washington. Still alive, according to the records. I made a note to contact him, though something in my gut told me he wouldn't want to talk about this. The rest of the file was standard procedure: witness statements, topographical maps, search grid patterns, but there were inconsistencies that bothered me. The coordinates listed for Dawson's last known location were marked on the map with a red X. Someone had drawn a second X in pencil, about 3 miles northeast, then erased it. You could only see it when you held the map up to the light. I photographed everything with my phone, against protocol, but I had a feeling this file might disappear if I left it unattended. Then I noticed something else. Clipped to the inside back cover was a second map, hand-drawn on graph paper. It showed the same general area as the official topographical map, but with additional markings, small circles scattered throughout the forest, each one numbered. No legend, no explanation. The largest circle was drawn around an area labeled Clearwater Creek Valley on the official map. But when I cross-referenced it with current USGS maps on my laptop, I couldn't find any Clearwater Creek Valley in that location. The geography didn't match. It was as if the valley existed in the 2004 maps but had been erased from subsequent editions. My phone buzzed. A text from my supervisor. "Hayes, need you upstairs. Priority briefing." I tucked the file under my arm against every regulation in the book and headed for the elevator. The fluorescent lights in the archive room flickered as I left, though that was probably just the building's failing electrical system. Probably. The briefing was about a new missing person case. A hiker who'd failed to return from a solo trek in the Cascades. It was assigned to another agent, but something made me ask, which part of the Cascades? Gifford Pinchot, my supervisor said. Why? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the file I'd brought up from the archives and placed it on the conference table. I think we need to look at this old case. There might be a connection. My supervisor, a woman named Grant, who'd been with the Bureau longer than I'd been alive, picked up the file with the kind of careful reverence you reserve for unexploded ordnances. She flipped through it slowly, her expression hardening with each page. "Hayes," she said finally, "where did you get this?" "Archive room. Box 847, shelf 12. "No." She shook her head. "This case was sealed. It shouldn't have been in the general archive." A chill ran through me. Sealed under what authority? Grant didn't answer. She was staring at Cole Brennan's handwritten note, the one warning against going back. When she looked up at me, there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Not quite fear, but close enough. "I need you to put this back," she said. "Right now, and then I need you to forget you ever saw it." With all due respect, that's not a request, Agent Hayes. I've been with the FBI long enough to know when to push and when to retreat. This was a retreat situation. I took the file back, rode the elevator down to the basement, and returned it to its water-damaged box on shelf 12. But I didn't forget about it, and I didn't delete the photos on my phone. That night, in my apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, I pulled up the images and started making notes. The hand-drawn map bothered me most. Those circles, those numbers, they meant something. I cross-referenced them with everything I could think of. Elevation markers, water sources, known campsites, historical landmarks. Nothing matched. Then I tried something different. I overlaid the hand-drawn map onto a current satellite image of the area, matching up the few landmarks that appeared on both. When I did, the circles aligned with something unexpected. Shadows. Deep shadows in the forest canopy, where the satellite imagery showed only darkness, even in the middle of what should have been a sunlit day. I zoomed in on the largest circle, the one around the non-existent Clearwater Creek Valley. The satellite image showed nothing but dense forest, Douglas fir, western hemlock, the usual Pacific Northwest coverage. But when I adjusted the image settings, increasing the contrast and brightness, I could make out something that shouldn't have been there. A pattern in the tree coverage. A perfect circle, approximately 200 meters in diameter, where the forest growth was noticeably different from the surrounding area. It could have been a natural clearing that had since been overgrown, or it could have been something else. I needed to talk to Cole Brennan. Finding his contact information took all of 15 minutes. The man had a listed phone number, which seemed almost quaint in an age where most people guard their privacy like state secrets. I called it twice before I realized I had no idea what I was going to say. On the third attempt, someone picked up. "Brennan?" The voice was rough, weathered. "Special Agent Cole Brennan?" A long pause. "I'm retired." "Yes, sir, I know. My name is Nolan Hayes. I'm with the Missing Persons Task Force in Seattle. I'm calling about a case you worked in 2004. File 04WA22847, Miller Dawson." The silence that followed was so complete I thought he'd hung up. Then I heard breathing, slow and deliberate. "Who gave you that file?" Brennan asked. "I found it in the archives. I'm reviewing cold cases for potential. That file was supposed to be sealed. It wasn't. It was in a box with water damage, general storage." More silence. I could hear rain in the background of his call, the same autumn storm that was currently lashing my windows. Finally, Brennan spoke again, his voice lower, more controlled. "Agent Hayes, I'm going to give you some advice. Put that file back. Stop asking questions about it. And for God's sake, don't go to those coordinates. Why not? Because I did. And 20 years later, I still can't sleep without seeing that place. My heart was pounding now. What did you find there? Nothing. The word came out sharp, definitive. That's the problem. We found absolutely nothing. No body, no evidence of violence, no sign of Miller Dawson ever having been there at all. But something was wrong with that place. The way the light fell through the trees. The way sound didn't carry right. My partner... He stopped himself. What about your partner? He saw something. Or he thought he did. In the trees, watching us. He wouldn't talk about it afterward. 2 months later, he requested a transfer to the Anchorage office and never worked a field case again. I scribbled notes as he talked, my handwriting deteriorating with each word. The coordinates in the file, I said. Your note says they're wrong. They are wrong. I changed them before I filed the final report. Why would you do that? To keep people away. Brennan's voice had taken on a quality I couldn't quite place. Not fear, exactly, but something adjacent to it. A weariness born from knowing something you wish you didn't. The real coordinates are in my head, and they're staying there. If you're smart, you'll drop this. There's a new missing person in the same area, I said. A hiker. What if there's a connection? The line went dead. I tried calling back 3 times. No answer. Brennan had said his piece and clearly had no intention of elaborating. But he'd also confirmed my suspicions. Something had happened in those woods. Something significant enough to make an experienced FBI agent falsify official reports and lose sleep for 2 decades. I pulled up the new missing person case on my laptop. Jason Brooks, age 28, experienced hiker, last seen 3 days ago at a trailhead near Mount Adams. His last text message to his girlfriend read, "Found something weird. Old clearing that's not on the map. Going to check it out." I felt my blood run cold. A clearing not on the map. I opened the satellite imagery again, zoomed in on that circular pattern I'd noticed earlier. Then I pulled up Jason Brooks's last known GPS coordinates from his phone's location data. They were less than half a mile apart. The next morning, I requested assignment to the Brooks case. My supervisor denied it without explanation. When I pushed back, she called me into her office and closed the door. "Hayes, I'm going to be direct with you. The Dawson case is closed. It's been closed for 20 years. Whatever you think you've found, I need you to let it go. A man is missing, and we have good agents working that case. Agents who don't have a history of..." She paused, searching for the right word. Overreach. That stung, mainly because it was true. I'd been reprimanded twice in my career for pursuing leads that my superiors deemed wasteful of Bureau resources. Both times, I'd been right. But being right doesn't always matter when you've gone around the proper channels to prove it. "Is this about the Dawson case?" I asked, because if there's some kind of security concern, there's no security concern. It's a cold case that was thoroughly investigated and properly closed. That's all it is. Then why was it sealed? Grant's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes. "Who told you it was sealed?" "You did. Yesterday, in the briefing room." I said it shouldn't have been in the general archive. That's different from being sealed. She was splitting hairs, and we both knew it. But I also knew I wasn't going to get anywhere by pushing harder. I nodded, accepted my dismissal, and left her office. But I didn't let it go. That weekend I drove to Bellingham. Cole Brennan's address led me to a small house on the outskirts of town, overlooking Bellingham Bay. The rain had let up, leaving everything wet and gray and smelling of pine. I knocked on his door twice before he answered. Cole Brennan looked exactly like I'd imagined. Late 50s, gray hair cut short, the kind of weathered face that comes from spending too much time outdoors. He opened the door halfway, blocking the entrance with his body. "Agent Hayes," he said, not sounding particularly surprised. "I figured you'd show up eventually. I need to know what you found in those woods." "I told you." "Nothing." "Then why did you change the coordinates? Why do you still have nightmares about it?" He studied me for a long moment, then stepped aside. "You better come in." His house was neat but sparse, a bachelor's dwelling. The living room held a couch, a television, a bookshelf filled with John Grisham novels and field guides to Pacific Northwest flora. On the wall, a single-framed photograph. Brennan and another man in FBI windbreakers, both younger, standing in front of a forest backdrop. "That's him," Brennan said, following my gaze. "Special Agent Kyle Marsh, my partner on the Dawson case. He died 3 years ago. Heart attack." "I'm sorry." "Don't be, he was lucky. Got out before." He cut himself off, moved to the kitchen. "Coffee? Sure." While he prepared it, I looked around the room more carefully. No other photographs, no personal mementos, just books and basic furniture and an emptiness that felt deliberate, like he'd stripped away anything that might carry memories he didn't want to keep. He returned with 2 mugs, black coffee, no sugar or cream offered. We sat across from each other, the coffee table between us, and for a while neither of us spoke. "You want to know what happened," Brennan said finally. "I can tell you, but it won't make sense. It didn't make sense to me, and I was there. Try me?" He took a sip of coffee, grimaced, set it down. Miller Dawson was a forest technician. Good at his job, experienced, not the type to get lost or take unnecessary risks. On October 12, 2004, he radioed in from a ranger station near Mount Adams. Said he'd found something unusual during a routine survey, some kind of clearing that wasn't on any of his maps. He wanted to investigate, document it, maybe figure out why it hadn't been recorded. That's not unusual, is it? Maps get outdated. No, but this was different. The survey maps for that area had been updated just 6 months prior. Everything should have been accurate. But Dawson was insistent that this clearing was significant. He said it was perfectly circular, about 200 meters across, and the vegetation inside was wrong. Wrong how? He didn't elaborate. That was his last transmission. When he didn't check in that evening, the ranger station initiated search protocols. By the time we got the call, he'd been missing for 36 hours. Brennan paused, staring into his coffee as if it might hold answers. The rain had started up again outside, a steady percussion on the roof. "We went in with a full search team," he continued. "Dogs, helicopters, the works. The coordinates Dawson had radioed in led us to the spot where he'd made the transmission, the ranger station. But there was no clearing anywhere near there, not within 5 miles in any direction. He gave you the wrong coordinates." "That's what we thought initially. Human error, misread the GPS, something like that. So we expanded the search grid, covered a wider area. Still nothing. No clearing, no sign of Dawson. It was like he'd just vanished." I leaned forward. "But you found something." "Not something, a place." He stood up abruptly, walked to the window, his back to me. On the 4th day of the search, Marsh and I split off from the main team. We were following a drainage that didn't appear on the maps. Not unusual, those forests are riddled with seasonal creeks that come and go. But this one felt wrong. The water was flowing uphill. That's impossible. I know what I saw, Agent Hayes. Water flowing uphill just slightly, barely perceptible, but it was there. We followed it for about 3 miles, and that's when we found the clearing. He turned to face me, and I saw it again. That haunted look in his eyes. The same one I'd heard in his voice on the phone. It was exactly like Dawson described. Perfectly circular, 200 meters across. The vegetation inside completely different from the surrounding forest. Where the rest of the area was Douglas fir and hemlock, the clearing had these thin, pale trees I couldn't identify. The ground was covered in moss so thick it felt like walking on a mattress. Did you find any sign of Dawson? No, but we found something else. He returned to his seat, picked up his coffee, set it back down without drinking. In the center of the clearing, there was a depression in the ground. Natural looking, like a sinkhole or collapsed burrow. Marsh wanted to investigate it. I told him to wait, that we should mark the location and come back with proper equipment, but he was already climbing down into it. The way Brennan said it, I could tell what was coming next was the part that still kept him up at night. I followed him down. The depression was deeper than it looked from the surface. It's maybe 15 feet. And at the bottom, there was an opening, a tunnel carved into the earth, sloping down into darkness. The walls were smooth, almost polished, like something had burrowed through them repeatedly over a long period of time. You went inside. We shouldn't have. I know that now. But we had a missing person, and we had a duty to search everywhere possible. So yes, we went inside. We had flashlights, radios, basic equipment. The tunnel went down for maybe 100 feet, then opened up into a larger chamber. He stood again, unable to sit still, and I realized he was reliving it as he spoke, walking through those memories like they were rooms in a house he couldn't escape. The chamber was empty, he said, completely empty. But the walls, they were covered in marks, scratches, gouges, like something had been clawing at the earth. And the smell, God, the smell was wrong. Not decay, not anything natural. It was sweet, almost floral, but underneath it was something else, something that made you want to leave immediately. Did you find anything else? We found a boot, just one, men's size 11, relatively new. The laces were still tied. It was sitting in the middle of the chamber, positioned upright, like it had been carefully placed there. The rain outside intensified, and I found myself grateful for the noise. It filled the silence that Brennan's words left behind. We took the boot, he continued, photographed everything, documented the location. Then we started to leave. That's when Marsh stopped moving. He was behind me, and he just stopped. When I turned around to see what was wrong, he was staring back into the darkness of the chamber, his flashlight beam shaking. What did he see? He never told me, not clearly anyway. He said there was something in the darkness, something that wasn't there before, something watching us. I didn't see it, but I felt it. This overwhelming sense that we weren't alone, that something was aware of us. Brennan's hands were trembling now. He noticed and clenched them into fists. We got out of there fast, climbed out of the depression, made it back to the edge of the clearing. But when we turned around to mark the GPS coordinates, the clearing was gone. I must have looked skeptical because he immediately added, "I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. But that's what happened." We were standing at the edge of a dense forest. The clearing we'd just walked through, it wasn't there anymore. Just trees, packed tight like they'd always been there. You got disoriented. That's what I told myself. That's what I wrote in my report. But I had the GPS coordinates from when we entered the clearing. When I checked them, we were standing in the exact same spot. The clearing should have been right in front of us, but it wasn't. I didn't know what to say. This was the part where any rational investigator would write Brennan off as unreliable. Stress-induced hallucination, maybe early onset dementia. But something in his delivery, the absolute certainty in his voice, made me hesitate. "What about the boot?" I asked. "We sent it to the lab. It matched Miller-Dawson's size and brand. But there was no DNA, no trace evidence, nothing to conclusively link it to him. It was just a boot and the photographs. Gone. When we got back to the field office and tried to upload them, the files were corrupted, all of them. The camera worked fine before and after, but every photo we'd taken in that chamber was destroyed. He finally drank his coffee, grimaced at its cold bitterness. I wrote up what I could in my report, he said. Documented the location based on the GPS coordinates. But when my superiors read it, they called me in for a psychological evaluation. Standard procedure for any agent who's been in a high-stress situation. I passed, technically, but they made it clear that my version of events wasn't going to fly. So I changed the coordinates in the final report, moved them a few miles south, and closed the case as unsolvable due to terrain. Why change the coordinates? Because I didn't want anyone else going there. Whatever that place was, it wasn't right. Marsh was never the same after that day. He had nightmares, started seeing things that weren't there. Eventually requested a transfer as far from Washington as he could get. He told me once, about a year later, that he still felt like something was watching him. That whatever we saw in that chamber had followed him home. I thought about Jason Brooks, the missing hiker who'd texted about finding a clearing not on the map. Have there been other disappearances in that area? Officially, no more than average for that part of the Cascades. Unofficially? He met my eyes. I've kept track. Over the past 20 years, 17 people have gone missing within a 10-mile radius of those real coordinates. Not all at once, not in any pattern that would raise red flags, but if you map them out, they form a circle around that spot. He pulled out a drawer from a side table and withdrew a folded piece of paper. When he opened it, I recognized the hand-drawn map from the case file, or rather, the original version of it. The circles, the numbers, they represented disappearances. I've been documenting them, Brennan said. Every missing person, every unexplained vanishing. The official files never connect them because they're spread out over time, different circumstances, different agencies handling the investigations. But they all have one thing in common. They were all last seen heading toward or near that central point. I studied the map. 17 circles, 17 people, 17 families left without answers. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because you're going to go there anyway. I can see it in your eyes. That same look Marsh had, that same need to know, so I'm showing you what you're walking into. Those woods aren't like other places, Agent Hayes. There's something wrong with them. Something that doesn't follow the rules we understand. I don't believe in the supernatural. Neither did I. He refolded the map and handed it to me. The real coordinates are written on the back. If you're determined to do this, at least go prepared. Don't go alone, don't go at night, and for God's sake, if you find that clearing, don't go into any tunnels you might find there. I took the map, feeling its weight in my hands. More than paper should weigh, more than geography should demand. One more thing, Brennan said as I stood to leave. If you do find Miller Dawson, or any of the others, I'm not sure you'll want to bring back what you find. I didn't tell anyone at the Bureau about my conversation with Brennan. I should have. It would have been proper protocol, might have even gotten me reassigned to the Brooks case officially. But some instinct told me that the moment I filed a report mentioning unexplained clearings and corrupted photographs, I'd be benched faster than I could explain myself. Instead, I did what any agent with more curiosity than sense would do. I started planning an unauthorized field investigation. The real coordinates Brennan had given me placed the clearing approximately 43 miles southeast of Mount Adams, in a section of the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest that saw relatively little foot traffic. The terrain was difficult. Steep ridges, dense undergrowth, no maintained trails within 2 miles of the location. Perfect for hiding something you didn't want found, or for something that didn't want to be found. I spent 3 days preparing. I requisitioned standard field equipment through normal channels: GPS unit, satellite phone, emergency locator beacon. The rest I bought on my own: high-quality camera with redundant storage, digital audio recorder, handheld radiation detector. I wasn't sure why, but the thought occurred to me and I couldn't shake it. And enough MREs to last 4 days if rationed carefully. On the morning of October 15th, I loaded everything into my personal vehicle, a beat-up Subaru that had seen me through countless cases, and drove east from Seattle. The rain had finally broken, leaving the world washed clean and unusually bright. Mount Rainier stood out against the sky, its snow-capped peak sharp enough to cut glass. I'd filed a vacation request that would cover the next 5 days. My supervisor had approved it without question, probably relieved to have me out of the office and away from files I shouldn't have been reading. I'd left a sealed envelope with a friend from Quantico, with instructions to open it if I didn't call within 72 hours. Inside was everything: copies of the Dawson file, Brennan's map, the real coordinates, and a detailed explanation of where I'd gone and why. Insurance, in case I became number 18 on Brennan's map. The drive took 3 hours, following Highway 12 through small towns that still looked like they belonged to the 1970s. Gas stations with analog pumps, diners with hand-painted signs, antique stores selling other people's memories. I stopped in Packwood for coffee and to top off my tank, watching locals come and go with the easy rhythm of people who knew everyone and trusted no one new. The last stretch of paved road took me to a Forest Service access point marked by a faded sign and a rusted gate that hung open like a broken jaw. Beyond it, a dirt road disappeared into the trees: Douglas fir, western hemlock, and western red cedar forming a canopy so thick that the midday sun became a distant memory. I drove for another 40 minutes, the road deteriorating with each mile, until I reached a small clearing where logging equipment had once been staged. This was as far as I could take the Subaru. The rest would be on foot. I checked my equipment one last time, secured my weapon in its holster, and shouldered my pack. The forest was quiet. Not silent, but quiet in a way that felt intentional. Birds called from the canopy, but distantly, as if they were commenting on something happening in another room. The air smelled of wet earth and decaying wood, the rich mulch scent that characterizes Pacific Northwest forests. According to my GPS, the coordinates Brennan had given me were 7.3 miles northeast of my position, with an elevation gain of approximately 100 to 800 feet. Not an impossible hike, but not an easy one either, especially with a full pack and no trail to follow. I started walking. The first few miles were manageable. I followed game trails when I could find them, picking my way through sword ferns and sellal when I couldn't. The forest floor was soft, with centuries of needlefall, muffling my footsteps into whispers. Every so often, I'd stop to mark my trail with reflective tape tied to branches, breadcrumbs back to civilization. Around hour 2, I noticed something odd. The birdsong had stopped. Not gradually, not fading with distance, but all at once like someone had flipped a switch. I stood motionless, listening, but heard only the whisper of wind through the upper canopy and my own breathing. I checked my GPS. Still on course, 4.1 miles to target. I kept moving, but slower now, more carefully. The terrain was getting steeper, forcing me to grab onto branches and roots to pull myself up rocky slopes. My hands were already dirty, my clothes snagged in a dozen places by thorns I never saw coming. At the 3-hour mark, I stopped for water and a protein bar. I'd climbed maybe 1,000 feet, and the forest had changed. The trees were older here, taller, their trunks so thick that 3 people holding hands couldn't encircle them. Very little light reached the forest floor, making navigation by sight difficult. I relied on the GPS, watching the distance to target slowly decrease: 2.8 miles, 2.6 miles, 2.4 miles. That's when I found the first marker. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. A small stack of rocks, 3 stones balanced atop each other, positioned beside what might have once been a trail. The stones were moss-covered, clearly old, but the arrangement was too deliberate to be natural. I photographed it from multiple angles, then checked my surroundings more carefully. About 20 yards to my left, I spotted another marker, then another beyond that. They formed a line, roughly parallel to my direction of travel, leading deeper into the forest. I had a choice: follow the markers or stick to Brennan's coordinates. The markers were leading slightly north of where I needed to go, but not by much. And something about them suggested intentionality. Someone had put them there for a reason, probably to mark a route through this trackless wilderness. I followed the markers. For the next hour, they appeared at regular intervals, sometimes rocks, sometimes notches cut into tree trunks, once a circle of stones that might have been a fire pit a century ago. Each one pulled me deeper into the forest, and with each one, the sensation of wrongness grew stronger. The light was fading differently here, not because the sun was setting. I still had at least 3 hours of daylight, but because the canopy was becoming impenetrable. The trees were pressing closer, their branches interlocking overhead in patterns that seemed too regular, too geometric. And then I noticed something else. The trees themselves were wrong. I'm not a botanist, but I've spent enough time in forests to recognize the common species of the Pacific Northwest. What I was looking at now didn't match anything in my mental catalog. The bark was too smooth, almost metallic in its sheen. The needles were pale, almost white, and when I touched them they felt waxy, artificial. I pulled out my field guide and flipped through it, trying to find a match. Nothing. These trees weren't supposed to exist. My GPS beeped. I'd reached the coordinates. I was standing in a grove of those pale, wrong trees, their trunks arranged in a rough circle around a small clearing. The ground here was covered in moss so thick it looked like carpet, exactly as Brennan had described, and in the center of the clearing, barely visible beneath the moss, was a depression in the earth. I'd found it. I approached slowly, every instinct screaming at me to turn around, to leave this place and never come back. But I was here, and I needed to know. I needed to understand what had happened to Miller Dawson and the 16 others who'd vanished in these woods. The depression was about 12 feet across, its edges rounded and smooth like something had worn them down over time. I knelt at the rim and looked down into it. The bottom was maybe 15 feet below, just as Brennan had said, and I could see the opening, the tunnel entrance, carved into the far wall. I activated my audio recorder. October 15th, 3:47 p.m. I've reached the coordinates provided by former Special Agent Cole Brennan. The clearing matches his description exactly. I'm preparing to descend into the depression to investigate the tunnel he mentioned. My voice sounded strange in the stillness, too loud and too small at the same time. I secured a rope to one of the pale trees and rappelled down into the depression. The moss was even thicker at the bottom, springy beneath my boots. Up close, the tunnel opening was larger than I'd expected. About 5 feet high, wide enough to walk through if I ducked my head. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it into the darkness. The beam revealed smooth walls exactly as described, sloping downward into shadow. I couldn't see how far it went. "Entering the tunnel now," I said to my recorder. "Time is 3:52 p.m. I had to crouch to fit through the opening, one hand on the wall for balance, the other holding my flashlight. The walls were cool to the touch and slightly damp, and they had that same unnaturally smooth quality as the pale tree bark above. Water dripped somewhere ahead, each drop echoing in the confined space. I descended slowly, counting my steps. At 53, the tunnel leveled out and opened into a larger chamber. I swept my flashlight across the space, and my breath caught. The chamber was exactly as Brennan had described, roughly circular, maybe 30 feet across, with walls covered in scratches and gouges. But there were things he hadn't mentioned, or hadn't seen. The floor was covered in objects, dozens of them, scattered across the moss like offerings at a shrine. I stepped closer, my light revealing the collection. Boots, backpacks, water bottles, a cracked cell phone, a wedding ring, a small stuffed animal, a hunting knife, a pair of glasses. Personal effects, abandoned or lost or deliberately placed. I knelt beside the nearest item, a leather wallet, water-damaged and moldy. I opened it carefully. Inside was a driver's license. Miller Dawson, DOB 03-15, 1970. The photo showed a man with a friendly face and a slight smile, someone who looked like he belonged in these woods. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I photographed everything, documenting each item and its position. As I worked, I became aware of a smell. That same sweet, floral odor Brennan had mentioned, with something sour lurking beneath it. It was getting stronger, or maybe I was just becoming more aware of it. That's when I heard the sound. It came from deeper in the chamber, from a section I hadn't illuminated yet. A soft scraping, like fabric dragging across stone, or skin sliding over something rough. I swung my flashlight toward the sound. The far wall of the chamber wasn't a wall at all. It was another tunnel, darker and deeper than the one I'd entered through. And in that darkness something moved. My training kicked in. I drew my weapon, holding the flashlight alongside it, illuminating and aiming in the same direction. "Federal agent, identify yourself!" The scraping sound stopped. Silence flooded the chamber, broken only by my breathing and the distant drip of water. Then, from the darkness, Hayes. My name, spoken in a voice I didn't recognize. Soft, almost gentle, but with an undertone that made my skin crawl. The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, echoing in the chamber in a way that defied the space's acoustics. "Who's there?" I demanded, my weapon steady despite the fear coursing through me. No response. Just that overwhelming silence. And the feeling, God, that feeling of being watched by something that had all the time in the world to study you. I took a step backward, toward the tunnel I'd entered through, keeping my flashlight trained on that far darkness. As I moved, my light caught something at the edge of the second tunnel's entrance. Scratch marks on the wall, fresh ones that hadn't been there when I first entered the chamber. And they weren't random gouges. They formed words, carved into the smooth surface. Turn back, turn back, turn back, turn back, turn back. The words repeated, spiraling down the wall and disappearing into the tunnel's throat. I didn't need to be told twice. I backed out of the chamber as quickly as I could without turning my back on that darkness. My flashlight beam swept across the scattered personal effects one last time, and I saw something I'd missed before. They were arranged in a pattern. Not random, not scattered. They formed a circle, with Miller Dawson's wallet at the center. Then my light flickered. It was a good flashlight, expensive, with fresh batteries I'd installed that morning. It shouldn't have flickered, but it did, once, twice, and in the strobing darkness between flickers, I saw something in the far tunnel. A shape, human-sized but wrong, standing just beyond where my light could fully reach. I didn't wait to see more. I turned and ran. The tunnel seemed longer on the way out, the slope steeper, my breathing harsher in the confined space. I could hear something behind me, not footsteps exactly, but a presence, a disturbance in the air that suggested movement. That scraping sound again, getting closer. I burst out of the tunnel and into the depression, not bothering with the rope, just scrambling up the mossy slope on hands and knees. My pack caught on something and I shrugged out of it, leaving it behind, focused only on getting up and out and away. I hauled myself over the rim and collapsed on the moss of the clearing, gasping for air. My flashlight was gone. I must have dropped it in my panic. My weapon was still in my hand, though, and I kept it pointed at the depression, waiting for something to follow me out. Nothing came. Minutes passed. My breathing slowed. The forest around me was utterly silent. No birds, no insects, not even the whisper of wind. It was as if the entire woods were holding their breath, waiting. I forced myself to stand, to check my surroundings. The pale trees ringed the clearing, motionless. The moss beneath my feet was undisturbed except for my own scrambling tracks. My pack was visible at the bottom of the depression, sitting beside the tunnel entrance like bait in a trap. I wasn't going back for it. I pulled out my GPS unit to mark the location and start navigating back to my vehicle. But when I activated it, the screen showed something impossible. According to the device, I was 12 miles from the coordinates Brennan had given me. Not at them, 12 miles away, in a completely different part of the forest. I checked again, thinking I'd made an error. Same result. I cycled through the GPS functions, trying to understand what was happening. The satellite signal was strong. The device was functioning normally, but it insisted I was nowhere near where I should be. Either the GPS was malfunctioning, or I'd never actually reached Brennan's coordinates, or, and this was the possibility that made my hands shake, the place I'd found wasn't where it was supposed to be. I tried my satellite phone next. It powered on, showed full battery, but couldn't acquire a signal. The emergency locator beacon was similarly useless. It activated, transmitted its signal, but I had no way to know if anyone was receiving it. The sun was starting to set, the already dim forest descending into genuine darkness. I had no pack, no supplies, no flashlight, and no reliable way to navigate. But I had my reflective tape markers, assuming they were still where I'd left them, assuming they led back to something real. I started walking, following my instincts more than any concrete plan, looking for the markers I'd tied to branches on my way in. The first one I found was 300 yards from the clearing, exactly where I'd left it. Relief flooded through me. At least something was consistent. I followed the markers through the gathering darkness, moving as quickly as I dared. The forest was changing around me, the pale trees giving way to normal Douglas fir and hemlock. The wrongness was fading, replaced by the ordinary dangers of moving through unfamiliar terrain and failing light. By the time I found my 7th marker, full darkness had fallen. I'd been reduced to feeling my way from tree to tree, finding the reflective tape by running my hands along branches at roughly the height I remembered placing them. It was slow, exhausting work, and every sound in the darkness made me freeze, certain that something was following me. Around midnight, I stumbled into a small stream. It wasn't on my mental map of the area, but water meant I could follow it downhill, and downhill eventually meant out. I filled my empty water bottle. I still had that, at least, and drank deeply. The water was ice cold and tasted faintly of minerals. I followed the stream for what felt like hours, sometimes wading through it when the banks became impassable, sometimes scrambling along rough terrain beside it. My feet were numb. My hands were bleeding from dozens of small cuts, and I'd lost all sense of direction except down. Just before dawn, I heard a sound that made me want to weep with relief. Traffic. The distant hum of vehicles on a highway, growing louder as I descended. 20 minutes later, I pushed through a final screen of brush and found myself standing beside Highway 12, about 15 miles west of where I'd left my vehicle. A logging truck was approaching, and I stepped into the road, waving my arms. The driver hit his brakes, the truck shuddering to a stop with the smell of hot rubber and diesel. "Jesus Christ, buddy," the driver said, leaning out his window. "You look like you've been through hell. You okay?" I wasn't okay. I was soaked, bleeding, exhausted, and probably mildly hypothermic. But I was alive, and I was out of those woods, and for the moment, that was enough. "I need a ride," I said, "and I need to make a phone call." The driver, his name was Earl, and he'd been logging in these mountains for 30 years, took me to the nearest town, a place called Randall that consisted of a gas station, a diner, and not much else. He bought me coffee and a breakfast sandwich while I used his phone to call the Seattle field office. Grant answered on the third ring. "Hayes, where the hell are you? You were supposed to be on vacation." "I need to report a field incident," I said. My voice sounded strange even to myself, hoarse, shaky, not quite under control. I found the location from the Dawson case, the real location. Silence on the other end. Then, "Stay where you are. Don't talk to anyone. Don't file anything. I'm sending a team to collect you." The line went dead. Earl gave me a strange look. "You in some kind of trouble, Agent?" "I honestly don't know." The team arrived 3 hours later. 2 agents I didn't recognize, both wearing the grim expressions of people who'd been sent to clean up someone else's mess. They didn't ask questions, just loaded me into their vehicle and started the drive back to Seattle. Halfway there, one of them, a younger guy with a Quantico haircut, turned in his seat to look at me. "For what it's worth, you're not the first agent to go looking for that place." "What?" "The clearing, the tunnel, whatever you want to call it. You're not the first to find it. You're just the first to make it back and talk about it." His partner shot him a warning look and he turned back around, but the damage was done. Questions multiplied in my mind, each one leading to darker implications. When we arrived at the Seattle field office, I was escorted not to the usual debrief rooms, but to a secure floor I'd never been to before. Grant was waiting, along with 2 men in suits who had OPR written all over them. Office of Professional Responsibility, Internal Affairs for the FBI. They sat me down in a room with no windows and a table that had seen better days. Someone brought me water and a blanket. Then the questions started. They wanted to know everything. Why I'd gone into the woods, what I'd found there, what I'd seen. I told them the truth, or as much of the truth as I could articulate. The clearing, the tunnel, the chamber filled with personal effects, the voice that had known my name, the scraping sounds in the darkness. They listened without comment, taking notes, occasionally exchanging glances I couldn't interpret. When I finished, one of the OPR agents leaned forward. "Agent Hayes, did you experience any symptoms during or after this incident that might suggest exposure to hallucinogenic compounds? Confusion, visual distortions, auditory hallucinations?" "No, I know what I saw." "The GPS malfunction you described, the impossible water flow Agent Brennan mentioned in his original report, these are consistent with disorientation and impaired judgment. I'm a trained federal agent. I know the difference between disorientation and physical reality." Grant held up a hand, stopping the interrogation. "Hayes, we need to conduct a psychological evaluation, standard procedure after any traumatic field incident. It's not a punishment. It's not a judgment. It's just something we need to do." I wanted to argue, but I was too exhausted. I nodded. They kept me in Seattle for 3 days, running me through a battery of tests: psychological, neurological, toxicological. Everything came back normal. I wasn't drugged, I wasn't crazy, and I wasn't lying. But something had changed. I noticed it in the way people looked at me in the hallways, the way conversations stopped when I entered rooms. I'd become one of those agents, the ones who'd seen something they couldn't explain and couldn't let go. On the 4th day, Grant called me into her office. She looked tired, older than I remembered. "Your evaluation came back clean," she said. "But I'm recommending you take extended leave. A month, maybe 2. You've been through something traumatic, whether you want to admit it or not." "What about the Brooks case? He's still missing." "The Brooks case is closed. His body was found 2 days ago, about 5 miles from where you were. Exposure and a fall, according to the medical examiner. No connection to the Dawson case or anything else you found." I felt something cold settle in my chest. Where exactly was he found? Grant pulled out a map and pointed to a location. When I compared it mentally to Brennan's map, to the pattern of disappearances, it fell exactly on the circle. Number 18. "That's not a coincidence," I said. "It's a tragedy, and it's a closed case. Hayes, I need you to let this go, for your own sake. There are 17 other people still missing, and we've investigated every single one of those cases thoroughly. Sometimes people get lost in the woods and we never find them. That's the unfortunate reality of wilderness search and rescue." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. Fear. She was afraid, not of me, but of what I'd found, or what I represented. "You know something," I said quietly. "About that place." Grant stood up, walked to her office door, and closed it, something I'd never seen her do before. When she turned back to me, her professional mask had slipped just enough to show the human underneath. "There are some cases that the Bureau can't solve," she said. "Not won't, can't. Things that don't fit into our framework of investigation because they operate on rules we don't understand. Every few years, someone stumbles onto one of these cases. Usually they have the good sense to leave it alone. Sometimes they don't. And what happens to the ones who don't? Some of them retire early. Some of them transfer to desk jobs. Some of them," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "some of them keep digging until they find something they wish they hadn't." Is that a threat? It's a warning from someone who cares about your career and your well-being. Take the leave, Hayes. Go somewhere sunny, somewhere far from these woods. Come back in a month with a clear head and a willingness to work on cases that actually have solutions. I wanted to argue, but looking at her face, I realized there was no point. Whatever the truth about that place was, it wasn't going to come from official channels. I took the leave. The first week, I tried to follow Grant's advice. I flew to San Diego, stayed at a cheap hotel near the beach, and attempted to enjoy being a tourist. But every night, I dreamed about the clearing. The pale trees, the moss, the tunnel descending into darkness. And that voice, soft and terrible, speaking my name from shadows I couldn't penetrate. On the 8th day, I gave up the pretense and flew back to Seattle. I'd been compiling information throughout my recovery, gathering everything I could find about the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, its history, its legends. What I discovered was a pattern that should have raised red flags decades ago. The first recorded disappearance in the area dated back to 1897. A prospector named Samuel Whitmore, who'd gone into the mountains looking for gold and never returned. Over the next century, disappearances occurred at a rate of roughly 1 every 5 to 7 years. Sometimes the bodies were found, sometimes they weren't, but the pattern held steady until 2004, when Miller Dawson vanished. After Dawson, the frequency increased. 1 every 2 years, then 1 every year. The most recent before Jason Brooks was a wildlife biologist named Dana Miller, who'd been conducting spotted owl surveys. She'd been missing for 14 months. I mapped out every disappearance I could find, going back to Whitmore, and the circle became even clearer. They all radiated from a central point, the coordinates Brennan had given me, the ones that, according to my GPS, I'd never actually reached. But I had reached something. I'd found that clearing, that tunnel, that chamber filled with the belongings of people who'd vanished. The question was, if I hadn't been at Brennan's coordinates, where had I been? I started researching the geology of the area, looking for natural phenomena that might explain the GPS malfunction. What I found was interesting. The Gifford Pinchot sits atop a complex system of lava tubes and caves formed by ancient volcanic activity. The rock in the area has unusual magnetic properties that can interfere with electronic equipment. It was plausible that my GPS had been thrown off by magnetic anomalies. Plausible, but it didn't explain everything. It didn't explain the voice that had known my name, or the fresh scratch marks warning me to turn back, or the way the clearing had seemed to vanish when Brennan tried to return to it. I needed to go back. I knew it was a bad idea, knew it violated every instruction Grant had given me, knew it might cost me my career. But the alternative was living the rest of my life with questions I couldn't answer and the faces of 17 missing people haunting my dreams. This time, I prepared differently. I contacted Cole Brennan again, despite his earlier reluctance, and convinced him to meet me in person. He agreed, with obvious hesitation, and we met at a diner in Olympia on a gray Wednesday afternoon. He looked worse than he had during my first visit, thinner, more drawn, like something was slowly consuming him from the inside. "You went there," he said as soon as I sat down. Not a question, a statement. "Yes, and you found it." "I found something. I'm not sure it was the same place you found." That caught his attention. I explained about the GPS malfunction, the coordinates that didn't match, the impossible distance. Brennan listened with the intensity of someone hearing confirmation of their worst fears. "It moves," he said finally. "Or we move, or something. I went back 3 times after the initial investigation trying to relocate it. Each time, I ended up in a different part of the forest, but I always found the clearing eventually. It was never where I expected, never where my coordinates said it should be, but it was always there, waiting." "Why didn't you include that in your reports? Would you have? Would you put in an official FBI report that you'd found a location that exists outside normal geography, that can't be mapped or predicted or understood?" I was trying to salvage my career, not destroy it. "Fair point. I need to go back," I said. "But this time I'm going prepared. I want to document everything, gather physical evidence, maybe finally understand what that place is." "You can't understand it." Brennan's voice was flat, defeated. "That's what I learned. That's what drove Marsh crazy and what's been eating at me for 20 years. We're investigators. We're trained to find patterns and explanations. But some things don't have explanations. Some things just are. I don't accept that. You will, eventually." He pulled out a notebook, scribbled something, and slid it across the table. "But since you're determined to make the same mistakes I did, at least let me help you not die in the process." The page contained a list. Never enter the tunnel alone. Mark your entry point with something unmistakable. Bring multiple independent navigation devices. Leave within 1 hour, no matter what. If you hear your name, leave immediately. Don't touch anything in the chamber. Trust your instincts over your equipment. That last one saved my life. Brennan said. My GPS was telling me to go north, but my gut said south. I followed my gut and found the road within an hour. If I'd trusted the GPS, I might still be walking. I photographed the list with my phone. Is there anything else I should know? Yes. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to just above a whisper. Whatever is in that place, it's aware. It knows when you're there, it knows who you are, and it has infinite patience. Dawson has been missing for 20 years, but I don't think he's dead. I think he's still there, in that place, and I think he's not alone. The words hung between us like a physical presence. How can you know that? I asked. Because I saw him. The third time I went back, 5 years ago, I made it down into that chamber again. And in the far tunnel, in the darkness, I saw someone standing there. He looked just like he did in his ID photo, exactly the same, not aged a day. He looked at me and he smiled, and then he stepped back into the darkness and disappeared. A chill ran through me. Did you try to follow him? No, because I realized something in that moment. Whatever he'd become, it wasn't Miller Dawson anymore. It was something wearing his shape, using his face, and it wanted me to follow. We talked for another hour, Brennan sharing details he'd never put in any official report. The way time seemed to move differently in the clearing. The sensation of being watched from above, even though the canopy was too dense for anything to hide there. The dreams that had started after his first visit and never stopped. Dreams of walking through endless tunnels, always descending, always seeking something that stayed just out of reach. When we parted, Brennan gripped my hand with surprising strength. Promise me something, Hayes. If you don't come back, if you become another circle on my map, at least let it mean something. Find out what that place is, understand it, because someone needs to, and I'm too old and too broken to keep trying. I promised him I would. 3 days later, I was back on the road to Gifford Pinchot, this time with a plan that bordered on obsessive preparation. I'd assembled a team, not FBI because I couldn't risk getting official sanction denied, but civilians with skills I needed. A professional cave explorer named Grant Tucker, who'd worked search and rescue in the Cascades for 15 years. A geologist named Patricia Evans who specialized in volcanic formations and magnetic anomalies. And, reluctantly, a freelance journalist named Marcus Reed who'd been investigating unexplained disappearances in the Pacific Northwest for the past decade. I'd chosen them carefully, vetted their backgrounds, and paid them well enough that they'd agreed to sign NDAs and not ask too many questions. What I'd told them was a simplified version of the truth. We were investigating a site of potential historical significance that might explain several missing person cases. They didn't need to know about voices in the dark or clearings that moved through space. We met at the same access point I'd used before, everyone equipped with their own specialized gear. Tucker had caving equipment, ropes, and lights designed to withstand underground environments. Evans brought geological survey tools, a magnetometer, and sample collection equipment. Reed had cameras, audio recorders, and a notebook he treated like a sacred text. "This is quite the operation," Evans said, surveying our assembled equipment. "For something you described as an exploratory survey." "I believe in being prepared," I said. "You believe in something," Reed countered. "The question is what?" I gave him a look that suggested he should keep such observations to himself, and we set out. The hike in was easier with daylight and multiple people, though no less unsettling. I led them along the route I'd taken before, following the old markers I'd placed and the new ones I'd researched in historical forestry records. The stone cairns were still there, as were the notches in the trees, But now I saw them differently, not as helpful navigation aids but as warnings, marking the boundary between the world we knew and something else. Tucker noticed it first. Anyone else feel like the woods are getting quieter? We all stopped listening. He was right. The ambient forest noise had faded without any of us consciously noticing. No birds, no insects, not even the rustle of small mammals in the underbrush. Could be we're making too much noise, Evans suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. No, I said. This is normal for this area, or normal for abnormal, if that makes sense. It didn't, but they trusted me enough to keep moving. The pale trees appeared about a mile from where my GPS claimed the coordinates should be. This time, seeing them in full daylight, their wrongness was even more apparent. The bark had an almost iridescent quality, shifting between gray and silver depending on the angle of light. The needles weren't needles at all, but something closer to scales, arranged in patterns that made my eyes hurt if I looked too long. "What species are these?" Evans asked, pulling out her field guide. "Unknown," I said. I looked. They don't exist in any database. That's impossible. Every tree in North America has been cataloged. Apparently, not every tree. She took samples, bark, needles, moss from the base of the trunks, sealing each in labeled plastic bags with the methodical precision of someone who believed in the power of empirical evidence. I envied her that certainty. The clearing appeared gradually, not all at once. One moment we were walking through dense forest, the next we were standing at its edge, looking across a circle of moss and wrongness. "Jesus," Tucker breathed. "You weren't kidding." The depression was exactly where I remembered it, though my GPS insisted we were 3 miles from any location I'd marked. The tunnel entrance beckoned from the bottom, a dark mouth waiting to swallow us. "I don't like this," Reed said, and I had to agree with him. In daylight, with preparation and companions, the place should have felt less threatening. Instead, it felt worse, like we were intruders at a private ceremony, unwelcome witnesses to something that shouldn't be observed. "Equipment check," I ordered, falling back on procedure to maintain control. We verified our gear: lights, ropes, navigation devices, emergency beacons, communication radios. Everything was functional. We descended into the depression as a group, Tucker going first with his climbing experience, the rest of us following on secured lines. At the bottom, we stood in a circle, flashlights illuminating the tunnel entrance. 1 hour maximum, I reminded them. No matter what we find, we exit in 1 hour. And if anyone hears their name called, we leave immediately. "Why would we hear our names?" Evans asked. "You probably won't. But if you do, don't answer and don't investigate. Just tell me and we go." They exchanged glances, and I could see the questions forming, but Tucker checked his watch and said, "Hour starts now," and we entered the tunnel. The descent was the same as before, smooth walls, dripping water, that sweet sour smell growing stronger. But with multiple lights I could see details I'd missed. The walls weren't just smooth, they were inscribed. Faint marks, almost too subtle to notice, covering every surface. They might have been natural formations, stress fractures in the stone, but the patterns were too regular, too purposeful. Reed was photographing everything, his camera flash creating strobing moments of clarity in the darkness. Evans ran her magnetometer along the walls, frowning at the readings. "This doesn't make sense," she muttered. "The magnetic field strength keeps shifting. It's like we're walking through multiple magnetic poles. Is that possible? Not naturally, no." We reached the chamber, and I heard Evans gasp. The scattered personal effects were still there, but there were more of them now. New additions since my last visit. A child's backpack with cartoon characters on it, an expensive-looking watch, a camping stove, a teddy bear. "Don't touch anything," I warned. though Tucker was already reaching for what looked like a climbing harness. "This is Scott's," he said, his voice strange. "Scott Miller. He was a friend of mine, went missing 3 years ago near here. We searched for weeks and never found a trace." He picked up the harness, ignoring my warning, and examined it closely. "There's no weathering. It looks brand new, like he just set it down yesterday." "Put it back," I said, more urgently than I intended. But Tucker was already setting it down, his hands shaking. Reed was filming the entire chamber, his camera capturing the spiral of objects, the scratched walls, the 2 tunnel entrances, the one we'd entered through and the darker one leading deeper. That's when I heard it. Hayes. The same voice as before, soft and terrible, coming from the far tunnel. But this time, it didn't stop. Hayes, Tucker, Evans, Reed. All our names, spoken in that gentle, wrong voice, echoing in the chamber like a litany. "We're leaving," I said. "Now." "Wait, I need more samples," Evans started, but Tucker grabbed her arm. "Trust the agent on this one," he said, and the fear in his voice was enough to convince her. We backed toward our entry tunnel, keeping our lights trained on the far darkness. And in that darkness I saw them, shapes, human-sized but not quite human, standing just beyond where our light could fully reveal them. 3, 4, maybe more. Silent, motionless, watching. One of them stepped forward into the edge of our light, and I recognized the face from the file photos. Miller Dawson, exactly as he'd looked 20 years ago. Not aged, not decayed, perfect and present and wrong. He smiled at us. "You came back." That's when Reed screamed. I turned to see him staring at one of the shapes in the darkness, his camera fallen to the floor. "That's my brother," he said, his voice breaking. "That's David. But he died 6 years ago. I was at his funeral. It's not him," I said, grabbing Reed and pulling him toward the exit. "Whatever it is, it's not your brother. Move!" We scrambled up the tunnel, Tucker in the lead, Evans and Reed behind him, me bringing up the rear. Behind us, I could hear movement, that scraping sound, but multiplied, like many things dragging themselves through the tunnel in pursuit. We burst out of the tunnel and into the depression, hauling ourselves up the ropes with desperate strength. Tucker made it to the top first, then Evans, then Reed. I was last, and as I climbed, I felt something grab my ankle. I looked down. Miller Dawson was looking up at me from the tunnel entrance, his hand wrapped around my boot, his smile still in place. "Stay," he said. "You're already part of this. You've been part of this since you found the file." I kicked hard, my boot connecting with his face. His head snapped back, but his smile never wavered, never changed. I kicked again, and his grip loosened just enough for me to pull free. I scrambled over the rim of the depression and immediately started running. We ran through the clearing, through the pale trees, into the normal forest beyond. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out, following Tucker's lead because he was the only one who seemed to have any sense of direction. We ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes, until the normal sounds of the forest returned. Birds, insects, the wind, and we knew we were truly out. We collapsed in a small ravine, gasping for air, none of us speaking for several minutes. When we finally caught our breath, Reed was the first to talk. "What the fuck was that?" I didn't have an answer. Evans was checking her equipment with shaking hands, reviewing the readings from her magnetometer. Tucker was staring back the way we'd come, his expression haunted. "I saw other people too," he said quietly, "in that darkness. Not just Scott. There were dozens of them, maybe more. The missing," I said. "All 17 of them, plus others we don't know about." "But they're not dead," Evans said. "They can't be. They look Alive. They look alive, I agreed. But I don't think they're living, not in any way we'd understand. We made it back to the access point as the sun was setting, exhausted and traumatized but alive. Reed had lost his camera in the tunnel, but Evans still had her samples and her equipment readings. Tucker had Scott Miller's harness, which he'd apparently grabbed despite everything. "What do we do with this?" Evans asked, gesturing to her collection bags. "These samples could be groundbreaking from a geological standpoint, but how do we explain where they came from?" "You don't," I said. "You forget you were ever here, you forget what you saw, and you don't speak of this to anyone." "That's not going to work for me," Reed said. "My brother was in that place, or something wearing his face. I need to understand what happened to him." "You can't understand it. That's what you need to accept," says the FBI agent who went there twice. "Why do you get to keep investigating while the rest of us have to forget?" He had a point, but I didn't have a good answer. Instead, I pulled out my phone and showed them the map Brennan had given me, the circles representing disappearances, the pattern radiating from a center that couldn't be properly mapped. "This is bigger than one person," I said. "Bigger than 17 people. This has been happening for over a century, and we're the first team to get close to understanding it. But if we go public, if we try to make this official, it gets shut down. The Bureau will seal it, just like they sealed Dawson's original investigation. Our only chance to actually help these people, or what's left of them, is to keep this quiet and keep digging." Tucker nodded slowly. "I can live with that. For Scott." Evans took longer to agree, but eventually she did. Reed was the holdout, and I couldn't blame him. If I'd seen my brother's face in that darkness, I'm not sure I could have walked away either. "Give me a week," he finally said. "Let me do some research, see if I can find any historical records that might explain this. Then we reconvene and decide what to do." It was the best I was going to get. We exchanged contact information, agreed to maintain regular check-ins, and parted ways. I drove back to Seattle in a daze, my mind replaying everything we'd seen. The shapes in the darkness, Miller Dawson's unchanged face, the voice that knew all our names. And most troubling of all, the way my ankle still felt cold where Dawson had grabbed it, like his touch had left a mark that went deeper than skin. When I got home, I checked my ankle in the bathroom light. There, barely visible, was a handprint. Not a bruise, not a scrape, but something else. A darkening of the skin in the exact pattern of fingers gripping flesh. It didn't hurt, didn't itch, but it was there. Unmistakable. I photographed it, added it to my growing file of evidence, and tried to sleep. In my dreams, I walked through tunnels that went down forever, following a voice that called my name with patient insistence, and at the end of the tunnels, in a chamber filled with the possessions of the lost, I found myself standing among them, not as an investigator but as one of the disappeared, my own badge and weapon lying at my feet while I smiled at the next person who came looking. I woke up screaming. The handprint faded over the next 3 days, but it never fully disappeared. Even now, 2 months later, if I look at my ankle in the right light, I can see it. A ghost of a touch, a reminder that something from that place had marked me. Reed kept his word and dove into historical research with the fervor of a man possessed. What he found was both more and less than I'd hoped for. References to the area in Native American oral histories, stories of a place where the forest bent wrong, and people who went there sometimes came back changed, or sometimes came back but weren't themselves anymore. The earliest written record he could find was from a fur trapper's journal dated 1843. The entry was brief. Found a clearing today that weren't on none of my maps. Perfect circle, pale trees like bone. Something in the ground calling out. Left markers so I could find it again. But when I went back the next morning, the markers were there, but the clearing weren't. Like the forest had moved overnight. The pattern repeated throughout history. People finding the clearing, trying to map it, failing to relocate it, or finding it again in completely different locations. By the 1920s, the U.S. Forest Service had apparently made an informal policy of not investigating reports of the moving clearing, treating it as local superstition not worth official attention. But what really caught Reed's attention was a geological survey from 1952. The surveyor had taken magnetic readings throughout the area and found an anomaly he couldn't explain, a point source of intense magnetic fluctuation that seemed to move around a central axis, never in the same location twice, but always within a roughly 10-mile radius. It's like a magnetic pole that's untethered from normal physics, Evans explained when Reed shared his findings with us at our one-week meeting. Which shouldn't be possible, but if it exists, it would explain the GPS failures and potentially the spatial distortions you described. It doesn't explain the people, Tucker said. The shapes in the darkness, the voice, Dawson's face. Magnetism doesn't do that. No, I agreed. But maybe it's a side effect, or maybe the magnetic anomaly is a symptom of something larger. We were meeting in a coffee shop in Tacoma, far enough from Seattle to feel safe from bureau oversight, but close enough to make the drive reasonable. Around us, normal people went about their normal days, unaware that they were sitting 50 miles from something that broke every rule they took for granted. Reed had brought his laptop and pulled up a satellite image of the Gifford-Pinchot region. I've been tracking the disappearances you mapped out, trying to find a pattern in their timing, and I found one. They cluster around specific astronomical events: equinoxes, solstices, new moons, solar eclipses. The correlation isn't perfect, but it's there. You think it's a cult? Tucker asked skeptically. I think it's cyclical. Whatever that place is, it becomes more active during certain times. And the next major event is in 3 days. The winter solstice. If we're going to go back, if we're going to try to actually understand this, that's our window. I should have said no. I should have shut down the entire conversation and stuck to my original plan of keeping things quiet and doing slow, careful investigation over months or years. But something in Reed's research had triggered a realization I couldn't ignore. The case had reopened for a reason. The file appearing in the General Archive when it should have been sealed. My assignment to cold case review despite being on the missing persons task force. The Brooks case dropping into my lap right after I'd found Dawson's file. The GPS malfunction that had led me to the clearing. Even Brennan's retirement file being available when it should have been restricted. It was too many coincidences, too many things aligning to push me toward that place. We're being led there, I said out loud, the realization crystallizing as I spoke it. Someone, or something, wants us to find it. Who? Evans asked. I don't know. Maybe the Bureau, maybe something else. But think about it. Every investigator who's gone looking for that place has found it. The difficulty isn't locating it. The difficulty is understanding what it is once you're there. And maybe that's the point. Maybe it wants to be found. The weight of that settled over our group. If the clearing was intentionally drawing investigators to it, if it had been doing so for over a century, then we weren't hunters tracking prey. We were prey being lured into a trap. So what do we do? Tucker asked. Walk away? I thought about Miller Dawson's face, unchanged after 20 years. I thought about the 17 other circles on Brennan's map, 17 families still looking for answers. I thought about Reed's brother, standing in that darkness wearing a smile that had probably never belonged to him in life. No, I said, we don't walk away. But we go smart, we go prepared, and we make sure that if something happens to us, the information gets out. Full documentation, copies to multiple people, dead man switches in case we don't return. Over the next 72 hours, we prepared with near-military precision. Evans assembled a team of colleagues, geologists, electromagnetic specialists, even a physicist who specialized in theoretical spatial anomalies, and briefed them on the basics without revealing the location. If we disappeared, they'd know where to send a follow-up team. Reed wrote up everything he'd found and sent copies to 3 different journalists he trusted, with instructions to publish if he didn't check in within a week. He also sent a copy to his lawyer with similar instructions. Tucker assembled a search and rescue team on standby, positioned at the forest access point with orders to come looking if we didn't emerge within 12 hours. I did what I should have done from the beginning. I wrote a full report detailing everything I'd found, every rule I'd broken, every protocol I'd violated. I sealed it in an envelope addressed to the director of the FBI and left it with my lawyer, along with instructions to mail it if I didn't return. Then, on December 21st, we went back. The forest felt different this time. Not more threatening exactly, but more aware. Every shadow seemed to watch us. Every sound seemed calibrated for our ears. We followed Reed's astronomical calculations, entering the forest at dawn on the solstice, planning to reach the clearing at solar noon when the sun would be at its southernmost point. The pale trees appeared exactly where we expected them, which itself was wrong. The clearing shouldn't be predictable, shouldn't follow rules. But there it was, perfect and circular and waiting. We approached cautiously, spreading out around the perimeter to observe from multiple angles. Evans's magnetometer was screaming with readings that shouldn't exist. Tucker was documenting the surrounding forest structure, noting how the pale trees formed a precise geometric pattern. Reed was taking photographs and notes, his hands surprisingly steady, and I was staring at the depression, at the tunnel entrance, knowing that we were going to go down there again despite every rational instinct screaming at us to leave. "Solar noon in 10 minutes, Evans announced. "If your theory about astronomical timing is correct, Reed, whatever happens should happen then." We waited, tension building with each passing minute. The forest around us was utterly silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Even our breathing seemed muted, absorbed by the moss beneath our feet. At exactly 12:07 p.m. the light changed. It wasn't the sun moving or clouds passing. It was the quality of light itself altering, becoming thicker, more viscous, like we were seeing it through water. The pale trees seemed to glow with their own internal illumination, and the depression in the center of the clearing began to emit a soft, pulsing light that matched no color I could name. "Equipment check," I said, my voice sounding strange in the altered air. Everything was functional, but the readings were impossible. Evans' magnetometer showed magnetic field strengths that would have required industrial equipment to generate. Our GPS units had all stopped working, displaying error messages or nonsense coordinates. The only thing that seemed reliable was our watches, still ticking forward in their mechanical certainty. "We go down," I said. "Together, tethered together, 1 hour maximum. And if anything goes wrong, we pull everyone out," Tucker finished. "No heroics, no solo investigations." We descended into the depression, roped together like mountain climbers, Tucker in the lead and me bringing up the rear. The light from the tunnel entrance was brighter now, pulsing in rhythm with something that might have been a heartbeat or might have been the earth itself breathing. The tunnel walls were humming, a low vibration that I felt more than heard, resonating in my bones and teeth. The inscriptions I'd noticed before were glowing faintly, spelling out patterns that hurt to look at directly. When we reached the chamber, it had changed. The personal effects were still there, still arranged in that spiral pattern, but now they were moving. Not dramatically, just shifting position slightly, realigning themselves into new configurations like pieces on a game board being repositioned by invisible hands. And the far tunnel, the one leading deeper, was no longer dark. Light came from it now, that same nameless glow as the depression entrance, illuminating the shapes that stood within. They were clearer now, more defined in the solstice light. Men, women, children, all standing motionless in the tunnel, all wearing faces I recognized from missing person reports. Miller Dawson was at the front, that same unchanging smile on his features. "We've been waiting," he said, his voice no longer soft or terrible but matter-of-fact, almost friendly. "You're the first to come during the alignment. The first to come when we can actually explain." "Explain what?" I asked, keeping my weapon holstered but ready. "What we are, what this place is, why we're here." He stepped forward, into the chamber proper, and the others followed. 17 faces, 17 missing people, all looking at us with eyes that held too much awareness, too much time. Reed made a choked sound. His brother was among them, wearing the same clothes he'd been buried in 6 years ago. "You're not them," Reed said. "You can't be them." "We are and we aren't," the thing wearing David Reed's face replied. "We're what they became when they came here, what this place makes of people who find it." Evans's scientific training kicked in despite the impossibility of the situation. "What is this place?" Miller Dawson smiled wider. "A door, one of many, scattered across the world, marking places where the membrane between spaces is thin. Most people walk past them without noticing, but some people, investigators, seekers, the curious, they find them, and when they do, when they cross the threshold, they become part of the pattern." "The pattern of what?" I demanded. "Transition, evolution, whatever you want to call it. This world is one configuration of reality, but there are others. Places where different rules apply, where consciousness and matter relate differently. The doors connect them, and people who pass through become ambassadors, perhaps. Bridges between states of being." Tucker was shaking his head. "That's impossible. You're talking about parallel dimensions, or quantum mechanics, or we're talking about the truth," Scott Miller's face interrupted. "The truth that your species has always sensed, but never quite believed. That reality is more flexible than you think, more permeable. That death isn't an ending but a transformation. That the missing aren't gone, they're just elsewhere." I thought about 20 years of closed cases, 17 families mourning people they'd never see again, the weight of all that grief and unknowing. If you can talk to us, if you can explain this, why didn't you before? Why let people think you were dead? "Because we weren't ready," Dawson said. "The transition takes time. You have to forget what you were before you can fully become what you are after. But now, at the alignment, when the membrane is thinnest, we can remember both states. We can be what we were and what we are simultaneously. We can explain." "I don't want your explanations," Reed said, his voice breaking. "I want my brother back." David Reed's face showed something that might have been sympathy. "I can't come back, Marcus. The person I was died 6 years ago. What I am now is something else. But I'm not suffering. I'm not in pain. I'm just different. That's not good enough. It's all there is." The light in the chamber was getting brighter, the pulse faster. Evans checked her watch. "We've been down here for 45 minutes. We should think about leaving." But I had to know. I had to ask the question that had been burning in my mind since I first found Dawson's file. Why us? Why were we led here specifically? Dawson's smile finally faltered. "You weren't led here. Not exactly. The clearings don't choose. They exist. They pulse with the cosmic rhythms, and people find them. But once you find one, once you become aware, you begin to see the pattern everywhere. The missing aren't random, Agent Hayes. They're people who were ready to transition, who sense the doors even if they didn't consciously understand what they were sensing. And investigators who get too close, who study the pattern too intensely, they start to resonate with it. That's what's happening to you. I felt that cold handprint on my ankle burning, even though it had faded weeks ago. The mark I gave you, Dawson continued, seeing my reaction. It's not a curse or a claim. It's a frequency, like a radio being tuned to a specific station. The more you investigate these disappearances, the more you think about this place, the stronger your resonance becomes. Eventually, you'll be ready to transition too. That's, I started, but Tucker grabbed my arm. Hayes, look. He was pointing at our rope, the one tethering us together. It was fraying, individual fibers breaking apart like they were dissolving in acid. We'd been down here 53 minutes. We're leaving, I said, now. You can leave, Dawson agreed. The door is always open in both directions, at least during the alignment. But you'll come back. Once you've seen us, once you understand what we are, the resonance will pull you back. Maybe in a year, maybe in 10, but you'll come back. We backed toward the entrance tunnel, eyes on the shapes that had been missing persons, weapons drawn even though we all knew guns wouldn't help if things went wrong. As we reached the tunnel mouth, Reed stopped, looking back at his brother. David, if you can't come back, can you at least tell me, did you choose this? Did you want to disappear? The shape wearing David Reed's face considered the question. I was driving through the forest taking photographs for my portfolio. I saw the clearing, saw these trees that shouldn't exist, and I was curious. I came to investigate. And when I found the tunnel, when I descended into the chamber, I felt something I'd never felt before. Belonging. Like I'd finally found the place I was supposed to be. So, yes, Marcus, in a way, I chose this. That's, Reed's voice broke. That's not enough. It's the truth. I'm sorry it's not the answer you wanted. We climbed out of the tunnel, up through the depression and back into the clearing proper. The light was already fading, the solstice noon passing, the membrane between worlds thickening again. By the time we reached the edge of the clearing, the pale trees were just trees again, and the depression was just a hole in the ground. We hiked out in silence, each of us processing what we'd seen, what we'd been told. Tucker's S&R team was waiting at the access point, and the relief on their faces when we emerged told me how worried they'd been. Back in civilization, we debriefed. Evan's equipment had recorded everything: the magnetic anomalies, the light fluctuations, the impossible readings. Reed had photographs and notes. Tucker had testimony from people who'd seen us go in and come out changed. But we all knew we couldn't release any of it. Not yet, maybe not ever. Because what explanation could we give? That we'd found a door to somewhere else? That the missing weren't dead but transformed? That reality itself was more flexible than anyone wanted to believe? 3 days after the solstice, Reed called me. I've been doing research, he said. Historical records, folklore, scientific anomalies. These clearings, these doors, they're everywhere. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scattered across the world. Different locations, different manifestations, but the same basic pattern. People go missing, investigators follow, some come back, some don't. Are you saying there's a network of these things? I'm saying there's a system, and I think someone needs to document it, to map it, to help people understand that when their loved ones vanish, they're not necessarily dead. They might just be elsewhere. I thought about Miller Dawson's unchanged face, about David Reed's admission that he'd found belonging in that darkness, about the 17 families still waiting for answers. "That's a big undertaking," I said. "It is, but I think it's important, and I think you'd be good at it. I'm FBI. I can't go around investigating paranormal phenomena. You're FBI for now, but how much longer can you work for an organization that officially denies the existence of something you've seen with your own eyes?" He had a point. I hung up and sat in my apartment, looking out at Elliott Bay, watching ferries cut their way through the gray water. My ankle itched where Dawson had touched it, that phantom handprint that would never fully fade. Grant called me into her office a week later. "I'm shutting down your investigation," she said without preamble. "The Brooks case is closed. The historical disappearances are cold cases with no viable leads, and I'm reassigning you to administrative duties effective immediately." "Why?" "Because you've become too invested in something that has no good ending. I've seen it before, Hayes. Good agents who get caught up in the unexplainable, who can't let go, who end up losing themselves to obsession. I won't let that happen to you." "What if I told you I found evidence? Actual, documented evidence of—" "I'd tell you to seal it in a file and forget about it. Whatever you found, whatever you think you understand, it's not going to change anything. The Bureau has protocols for dealing with cases like this. We document them, we seal them, and we move on." I stood to leave, but she stopped me. "Hayes, I know you think I'm blocking your investigation to protect the Bureau's image or to maintain some kind of conspiracy of silence, but I'm doing it to protect you. There are some doors that shouldn't be opened, some questions that shouldn't be answered. Trust me on this." I wanted to argue, but looking at her face, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. The same haunted look that Brennan had. The same weight of knowledge that couldn't be shared. Grant knew. She'd always known. And she'd been trying to save me from what she'd learned. "How many times have you been there?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer, just looked away. I submitted my resignation from the FBI 2 weeks later. 30 days after that, I was a civilian again, free to investigate whatever I wanted without worrying about Bureau protocols or official sanction. Reed, Evans, Tucker, and I formed a private research group. We called it the Threshold Documentation Project, though we told most people it was just missing persons research and geological surveying. We received private funding from sources who understood that some questions were worth asking, even if the answers were disturbing. Over the next year, we documented 15 more clearings across North America, each one with its own pattern of disappearances, its own geometric configuration of wrongness. We interviewed families, collected testimonies, mapped the locations. We didn't find all the missing people. Most had transitioned fully and couldn't communicate outside the alignment windows, but we found enough to understand the pattern. And I found something else, the resonance Dawson had mentioned. The more I investigated, the more I could feel the clearings calling to me, even from hundreds of miles away. It wasn't unpleasant exactly, just a persistent awareness, like a song stuck in your head or an itch you can't quite scratch. Cole Brennan died in March, peacefully in his sleep according to the official report. But I got a letter from him 2 days before his death, postmarked locally, written in a shaky hand. "Hayes," it read. "I'm going back tomorrow. Not because I have to, but because I want to. I've spent 20 years running from that place, from what I saw there, from what I felt. But I'm tired of running." And I realized something. Dawson looked happy. All of them did. Whatever they'd become, whatever transformation they'd undergone, they weren't suffering. They'd found something, some kind of peace or purpose that this world couldn't offer them. I don't know if I'm ready to transition, if that's even the right word for it. But I want to understand. I want to stand in that chamber during the next alignment and ask them the questions I was too afraid to ask before. And if they offer me the choice, to stay or to change, I might take it. Don't mourn me if I don't come back. And don't feel guilty about the case. You did what any good investigator would do. You followed the evidence where it led. The fact that it led somewhere impossible isn't your fault. There's a file in my safety deposit box. The key is taped to the back of this letter. In it, you'll find everything I documented over the past 20 years. Every disappearance, every pattern, every time I went back to that clearing. Use it. Help people understand that their loved ones aren't gone, just transformed into something we don't have words for yet. Good luck, Agent Hayes. And if you eventually decide to walk through one of those doors yourself, I hope you find what you're looking for on the other side. I found his body in the clearing 3 days later, lying peacefully at the bottom of the depression, a smile on his face. There was no sign of violence, no indication of how he'd died. The medical examiner ruled it a heart attack brought on by the exertion of the hike, which was plausible enough for official purposes. But I knew better. I knew that during the spring equinox, 2 days before I found him, Cole Brennan had made his choice. I'm writing this 2 years later, sitting in my office in Seattle, looking at a map covered in pins. Each pin represents a clearing, a door, a threshold between this world and something else. We've documented 47 of them now, and we're finding more every month. The FBI officially denied my resignation and put me on permanent administrative leave instead, a bureaucratic compromise that lets them maintain some connection to my work without officially sanctioning it. Grant retired last year and sends me emails occasionally, usually just check-ins to make sure I'm still alive and still myself. I am, for now. But the resonance is getting stronger. I dream about the clearings every night, about walking through tunnels that go down forever, about standing in chambers filled with the transformed faces of the missing. Sometimes Brennan is there, or Dawson, or David Reed. Sometimes it's people I haven't identified yet, faces I'll recognize when I finally find their missing person reports. The handprint on my ankle is permanent now. It doesn't fade with time or hide in different light. It's just there, a reminder that I've been marked by something that exists outside normal causality. Reed asks me sometimes if I think we're doing the right thing, documenting these places, helping families understand that their loved ones aren't dead but changed. I tell him I don't know. Maybe giving people closure is worth it, even if the closure comes in the form of knowing their daughter or husband or friend is now something that exists in the spaces between spaces, conscious but transformed beyond recognition. Or maybe we're just making it worse, giving people hope where they should be learning to grieve. The next alignment is in 3 weeks, the summer solstice. We're planning to investigate a new clearing in Northern California, one that's been accumulating disappearances for the past 18 months. We'll document it, photograph it, try to communicate with whatever shapes we find in its depths. And I'll feel that pull, that resonance, that gentle insistence that I could stay if I wanted to, that I could choose transition over investigation, transformation over understanding. I don't know if I'll resist it forever. I don't know if I want to. But for now, I'm still here, still documenting, still trying to understand. Because someone needs to. Because the missing deserve to have their stories told, even if those stories end in places we can't follow. Because in the end, the case that never closed isn't just about Miller Dawson or the 17 others or the hundreds more we've documented across the world. It's about the fundamental question of what happens when you cross a threshold you can't uncross, when you find a door that only opens one way, when you discover that reality is far stranger and more permeable than you ever imagined. I have the coordinates in my desk drawer, Brennan's original ones, the real ones. the ones that don't match any GPS reading because the place they describe exists outside normal geography. I look at them sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, and I feel that pull, that invitation. Someday, maybe soon, I'll go back one more time. Not to investigate, not to document, but to choose. And when I do, when I descend into that tunnel for the last time and stand in that chamber of transformation, I hope I find the courage to ask the question that matters most. Not, why did this happen, but, am I ready for what comes next? The file remains open. The pattern continues. And somewhere in the forests of Washington, beneath pale trees that shouldn't exist, doors keep opening and closing, waiting for the next person curious enough or desperate enough or simply ready enough to walk through. I dream about it every night. The coordinates are 46.2 de Gorser N, 121.7183 degree WW. But they're not. They're everywhere and nowhere, shifting with cosmic rhythms we don't understand, marking places where one reality bleeds into another. I'll go back during the next alignment. I know I will, and when I do, I might not return. But if you're reading this, if you found this file somehow, then you deserve to know. The missing aren't dead. They're just somewhere else, transformed into something we don't have names for, existing in spaces between the spaces we know. And if you look hard enough, if you're curious enough, if you resonate at the right frequency, you'll find the doors too. What you do when you find them, that's your choice. Just remember, some doors only open one way. My name is Special Agent Evan Miller, and I've been coordinating search and rescue operations for the FBI's Critical Incident Response Group for 9 years. I've overseen recoveries in every terrain you can imagine. Deserts, mountains, swamps, urban disaster zones. I found people alive against impossible odds, and I found people dead in ways that still visit me at night. But I've never had a search area actively fight back against being searched. Not until the Griffith case. It started on a Tuesday morning in late September when I got a call from the Olympic National Forest Service. A family of 4, Robert and Jennifer Griffith, their 2 children Emma, age 9, and Lucas, age 6, had failed to return from a camping trip in the Hoh Rainforest region. Their vehicle was found at the trailhead parking area, their campsite located 2 miles in, but the family themselves had vanished. Standard missing persons protocol at first. I assembled a team, coordinated with local SAR units, and prepared for what I assumed would be a 3 to 5 day operation. We'd done hundreds of these. Most ended with embarrassed hikers who'd wandered off trail being found within 48 hours. Some ended with bodies and grief counseling. Very few ended with no resolution at all. The Griffith case would become one of those very few. I drove out from Seattle on Wednesday morning, arriving at the Olympic National Forest headquarters around noon. The ranger station was a squat wooden building that smelled of coffee and wet dog, staffed by people who looked like they'd been carved from the same ancient cedars that surrounded the place. Ranger Patricia Coleman was my point of contact. Mid-40s, weathered face, eyes that had seen too many search operations end badly. She had the family's information laid out on a conference table. Permits, vehicle registration, last known photos taken from the father's social media account showing them setting up camp. They checked in at the ranger station Sunday afternoon, Coleman said, pointing to the logbook. Robert Griffith, experienced hiker, had all the right gear. He filed a route plan, 2 nights at Campsite 14. Basic loop trail, nothing technical. They were supposed to check out Tuesday morning. When they didn't show by Tuesday afternoon, we sent a ranger to investigate. And campsite was there. Tent, sleeping bags, cooking equipment, backpacks. Everything except the people. Coffee pot was still on the camp stove, half full and cold. Food was out like they'd been interrupted in the middle of breakfast. I felt the first stirring of unease. People don't just leave a campsite mid-meal unless something urgent pulls them away. Any signs of struggle? Animal activity? That's the strange part. Coleman pulled out photographs of the campsite. Everything was too neat. The food wasn't disturbed. If a bear or cougar had been around, they would have gone for it. No torn fabric, no blood, no drag marks. It's like the family just stood up and walked away from breakfast. I studied the photos. She was right. The scene was eerily undisturbed. 2 adult camping chairs positioned around a portable table. 4 mess kits with partially eaten oatmeal. A stuffed rabbit sitting on a child's sleeping bag inside the tent. All of it arranged as if the family had simply paused their morning and never resumed it. What about the surrounding area? Any tracks? That's where it gets weird. Coleman pulled out a hand-drawn map. We found tracks leading away from the campsite heading northeast, off the established trail. 4 sets of prints, 2 adult, 2 child-sized. We followed them for about a quarter mile, then they just stopped. Stopped how? Stopped like they walked up to a certain point and then ceased to exist. The tracks didn't fade or get obscured, they ended at a specific spot, mid-stride, like the family had been lifted off the ground. I've heard a lot of search and rescue stories. Most of them have logical explanations that only seem mysterious because we're missing information. But tracks that end mid-stride, that was new. Show me, I said. We hiked into the forest that afternoon, Coleman leading me along the established trail to campsite 14. The Hoh rainforest is one of the wettest places in the continental United States, receiving over 12 feet of rain annually. Everything grows here. Sitka spruce reaching heights that make you dizzy to look up at. Big leaf maples draped in moss like green shawls. Ferns carpeting the forest floor in layers so thick you can't see the ground beneath. It's beautiful in the way that old cathedrals are beautiful, overwhelming, humbling, vaguely threatening in its vastness. The campsite was exactly as the photos had shown. Undisturbed, waiting, wrong. I walked the perimeter while Coleman waited at a respectful distance. The tent was a good model, relatively expensive, set up with the kind of care that suggested experience. Inside, I found the children's sleeping bags arranged carefully, personal items organized in stuff sacks, a small pile of books for bedtime reading. A family that planned to come back. I examined the camp stove, the food, the positioning of everything. Then I noticed something the photographs hadn't captured. On the portable table, partially hidden under a paper plate, was a spiral notebook. I picked it up carefully. It was a journal, the kind marketed to children with inspirational quotes on the cover. Emma Griffith's name was written inside the front cover in careful cursive. I flipped through the pages. Drawings of trees and animals, descriptions of their hike in a 9-year-old's enthusiastic handwriting, observations about mushrooms and moss and birds. The last entry was dated Monday evening. Dad says we'll see the big trees tomorrow. Lucas is scared because he heard something walking around the tent last night, but Mom says it was probably just a deer. I didn't hear anything, but I believe Lucas because he doesn't lie. I hope we see an elk. Dad promised we would see an elk if we're quiet enough. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Just a child's hopes for the next day's adventure. I bagged the journal as evidence and moved to where Coleman indicated the tracks had been found. Even 3 days later, they were still visible in the soft earth, running shoe treads in various sizes, moving in a consistent direction away from the campsite. We followed them northeast, off the established trail and into deeper forest. The tracks were clear at first, easy to follow, preserved by the moisture in the soil and the lack of new rain. But as Coleman had described, about a quarter-mile from the campsite, they simply ended. I stood at the terminus point, looking at what should have been impossible. 4 clear footprints, mid-stride, pressed into the earth with the weight and momentum of people walking at a normal pace. And then nothing. No more tracks, no disturbance in the surrounding vegetation, no indication of where the family had gone next. "What's the terrain like beyond this point?" I asked. Coleman gestured around us. "More of the same. Dense forest, some deadfall, a few seasonal creeks. Nothing that would explain tracks disappearing. We've had 3 separate teams search this area. Local SAR, our own rangers, and a K9 unit from Port Angeles. The dogs picked up the scent from the campsite, followed it to this spot, then lost it completely. They circled for hours trying to reacquire, but came up with nothing. Dogs don't lose scent like that. Not in a forest this damp, where scent particles cling to moisture and linger for days. Unless the family had been lifted by a helicopter, which we would have heard, or had somehow managed to completely mask their scent, the dogs should have found something. "I want to establish a grid search," I said. "Start from this point and work outward in all directions. If they're out here, we'll find them." Coleman nodded, but I saw doubt in her expression. She'd already done this, I knew. She'd already searched and found nothing. But protocol demanded we try again, and I was good at following protocol. We spent the rest of the daylight hours establishing a search perimeter and making plans for the full operation to begin the next morning. I had teams coming from Seattle, K9 units, a helicopter with thermal imaging, volunteer SAR groups from 3 counties. We would saturate the area with searchers and technology until we found the Griffith family, or until the forest proved we couldn't. That night, I stayed at a small motel in Forks, the closest town to the search area. I couldn't sleep, so I reviewed the case file on my laptop, looking for something everyone else had missed. Robert Griffith was 42, worked in software development, had been hiking in the Pacific Northwest for 20 years. Jennifer was 39, a teacher, also experienced in outdoor recreation. Neither had any history of mental illness, no financial problems, no indicators that this might be a voluntary disappearance. The children were healthy, happy, according to school records and social media posts. This was a normal family, on a normal camping trip that had somehow become abnormal in the space between finishing dinner Monday night and abandoning breakfast Tuesday morning. I pulled up satellite imagery of the search area, studying the terrain from above. The forest canopy was so dense that most of the ground was invisible, just an endless expanse of green broken occasionally by the silver threads of creeks and rivers. I marked the campsite location, the point where the tracks ended, and drew concentric circles radiating outward. Within a 5-mile radius there were no roads, no structures, no easy exit points from the forest. If the family was trying to leave on foot, they'd chosen the most difficult possible direction. If they were lost and disoriented, they should still be within the search parameters we'd established. Unless they weren't lost. Unless something else had happened. I tried not to think about the something else scenarios. The Pacific Northwest has its share of violent crime, but family abductions from campsites are vanishingly rare. Animal attacks were more common, but we'd found no blood, no signs of struggle, no indication that anything predatory had visited the campsite, which left accident, misadventure, or something I hadn't thought of yet. My phone rang at 2:17 a.m. Coleman's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Miller, we've got something. Search team doing a night sweep with thermal imaging just picked up heat signatures about 3 miles northeast of the campsite. 4 distinct sources. Human-sized, stationary." I was dressed and in my vehicle before she finished the sentence. "I'm on my way. Don't approach until I get there." already gave that order. But Miller, the location is strange. Strange how? The heat signatures are showing up in an area we've already searched twice. Both teams logged it as clear. No signs of human presence, no tracks, nothing. But now the thermal is showing 4 people just sitting there. That cold feeling settled in my chest again. The one I get when a case stops making sense. Maintain visual contact and wait for me. The drive to the Forest Service Road took 20 minutes, then another 30 to hike in with Coleman and a small team to the location the helicopter had marked. We moved through the darkness with headlamps and GPS units, the forest pressing close on all sides, every shadow deep enough to hide anything. The helicopter circled above, its spotlight occasionally breaking through the canopy in shafts of brilliant white. Over the radio, the pilot's voice crackled. Still showing 4 signatures, no movement. They've been stationary for over an hour. We reached the coordinates just after 4 a.m. Coleman called a halt, and we formed a perimeter around the area, lights trained on a small clearing barely large enough to qualify as open space. The clearing was empty. "Pilot, confirm coordinates," I said into my radio. "Confirmed. You should be right on top of them." I swept my flashlight across the clearing. Ferns, moss, fallen logs thick with decay. No people, no movement, no heat signatures that I could see with my own eyes. "Thermal still showing them?" I asked. A pause. "That's negative. Signatures just disappeared. All 4 simultaneously about 30 seconds ago." I felt the hairs on my neck rise. We'd been within 100 yards of this location for the past 10 minutes, closing in carefully and quietly. If there had been people here, they couldn't have left without us seeing or hearing them. The forest was too dense, too noisy underfoot with its layers of wet vegetation and fallen branches. "Fan out," I ordered. "Search pattern alpha. Look for any indication that people were here. Footprints, disturbed vegetation, anything." We searched for 2 hours as dawn crept through the canopy. We found nothing. The clearing was undisturbed, the surrounding forest untouched. Whatever the thermal imaging had detected, it had left no physical trace. By the time we called off the night search, I was cold, exhausted, and deeply unsettled. 4 heat signatures appearing in an area we'd already searched, remaining stationary for over an hour, then vanishing the moment we got close. That wasn't normal missing persons behavior. That was something else. The full search operation began at 8 a.m. with over 60 personnel spread across a grid pattern covering 12 square miles. We had 3 K9 units, 2 helicopters, drone coverage, and enough volunteers to search every square foot of forest within our perimeter. By 2 p.m. we'd found nothing. By 6 p.m. we'd found less than nothing. We'd found anomalies. The first team to report something strange was Grid 7, searching an area about 2 miles east of the campsite. They'd been instructed to look for any signs of human passage, any disturbance in the natural environment. What they found instead was an absence of disturbance. "It's like this whole section has been smoothed," the team leader reported. "There's a roughly circular area, maybe 50 feet across, where there are no fallen branches, no broken ferns, no disturbed moss. Everything is too perfect, like someone came through and arranged it." I hiked to their position to see for myself. They weren't exaggerating. There was a clear demarcation between the normal, chaotic undergrowth of the rainforest and this circular area of almost manicured neatness. The ferns grew in uniform patterns. The moss was evenly distributed. Even the fallen logs seemed positioned with geometric precision. "Could be natural," one of the volunteers suggested. "Maybe a wind pattern or water flow that creates this kind of formation." But we all knew it wasn't natural. Nature doesn't do perfect circles. Nature doesn't arrange vegetation with mathematical precision. I photographed everything, marked the GPS coordinates, and told the team to continue their sweep. Over the next 3 hours, 2 more teams reported finding similar circular clearings, each approximately 50 feet in diameter, each displaying the same unnatural orderliness. When I plotted them on my map, my unease crystallized into genuine fear. The 3 circles formed a perfect equilateral triangle, with the point where the family's tracks had ended at the exact center. Coleman saw it too. That can't be coincidence. No, I agreed. It can't. We expanded the search to look for more of these cleared circles. By nightfall, we'd found 6 total, all roughly the same size, all displaying the same characteristics, all positioned at points that formed a larger geometric pattern around our central search area. And at every single circle, the K9 units went crazy. The dogs would approach, hackles raised, then refuse to enter the cleared spaces. They'd circle the perimeter, whining and pulling on their leads, but would not set foot inside those perfect circles no matter how their handlers coaxed them. I've worked with search dogs for years. They're trained to ignore their instincts and follow commands, to enter dangerous spaces and unstable structures in pursuit of their targets. Whatever they were sensing in those circles was strong enough to override their training. That night, I called a briefing with all team leaders. We gathered in the ranger station conference room, tired and frustrated and increasingly spooked by what we were finding, or not finding. "Let's review what we know," I said, standing at the head of the table with the map displayed on the wall behind me. Family of 4 vanished sometime Monday night or Tuesday morning. Tracks lead away from campsite and end abruptly. Thermal imaging detects 4 human-sized heat signatures in an already searched area. Signatures disappear when we approach. We found 6 circular clearings displaying unnatural characteristics and some kind of environmental factor that disturbs K9 units. I paused, looking at the faces around the table. I know what you're all thinking, because I'm thinking it too. This doesn't add up to any missing persons case we've worked before. But we're going to proceed as if it's solvable, because the alternative is unacceptable. 4 people are out there somewhere, and we're going to find them. Coleman raised her hand. "Miller, I think you should know, this isn't the first time we've had strange occurrences in this section of the forest." Everyone turned to look at her. "About 8 years ago, we had a solo hiker go missing in almost the exact same area. Marcus Dane, age 34, experienced outdoorsman. He was doing a multi-day trek and failed to check in at his designated time. We searched for 2 weeks and found his campsite, but never found him." "Was his campsite abandoned like the Griffiths?" "Similar, yes. Everything was there except the person. His journal showed no signs of distress, no indication he was planning to leave. He just disappeared. We eventually classified it as death by misadventure, body unrecovered." "Were there any unusual findings during that search?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Coleman nodded slowly. "The search teams reported areas where the dogs wouldn't go, places where the vegetation seemed wrong somehow, too organized. We noted it in the reports but never found an explanation. Eventually, we wrote it off as searcher fatigue and pattern seeking. People see what they expect to see when they're tired and stressed." "But you didn't believe that." "No, I didn't, and I still don't." I looked around the table at the assembled team leaders, seeing my own doubts reflected in their faces. We were trained professionals, rational people who dealt in evidence and procedure. But something about this case was pushing us into territory where rational explanations became increasingly inadequate. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow we expand the grid, bring in additional resources, and search every square inch of forest within a 10-mile radius. Someone check if there are any geological surveys of this area. Caves, lava tubes, anything underground that might explain how people could vanish. And I want historical research on any other disappearances in this region, official or anecdotal. The meeting broke up with everyone assigned new tasks. As the room emptied, Coleman approached me with a folder I hadn't seen before. "This is off the record," she said quietly. "Personal notes I've kept over the years. Incidents that seemed strange but never rose to the level of official reports. Missing time, equipment malfunctions, people reporting they got turned around in areas they knew well. Nothing conclusive, just a pattern." I opened the folder. Inside were handwritten notes spanning almost 15 years, documenting dozens of small anomalies across this section of the Olympic National Forest. Hikers who swore they'd walked in a straight line for hours, only to end up back where they started. GPS units that malfunctioned in specific locations. Compass needles that spun without settling. Search operations where teams reported searching the same area multiple times and finding different things each time. "Why didn't you report this through official channels?" "Because it sounds crazy," Coleman said bluntly. "And because the moment you start talking about forests that don't behave according to natural laws, you stop being taken seriously." "But I've worked these woods for 23 years, Miller. I know every trail, every landmark, every seasonal variation. And I'm telling you, there's something wrong with this place. Has been for as long as I've been here, probably longer." I studied her face, looking for signs that she was unstable or prone to flights of fancy. I saw only grim certainty, the expression of someone who'd seen too much to dismiss it anymore. "What do you think is causing it?" "I don't know. Magnetic anomaly, underground water systems affecting navigation equipment, mass hysteria. Pick your explanation. But whatever it is, it's real, and it's been here long enough to develop a pattern. And that pattern suggests that this forest doesn't want to be searched." The phrase hung in the air between us. A forest that doesn't want to be searched. Forests don't want things. They're ecosystems, collections of plant and animal life operating according to natural processes. They don't have desires or intentions or the ability to resist human activity. Except this one seemed to. I spent the rest of the night reviewing Coleman's notes and cross-referencing them with official incident reports. The pattern she'd identified was subtle but undeniable. This particular section of the Olympic National Forest had a higher than average rate of what she called navigational failures. People getting lost, equipment malfunctioning, search operations that should have been straightforward becoming complicated and protracted. The most disturbing entry was from 6 years ago, a search and rescue operation for a missing child that had lasted 48 hours. The child, a 7-year-old boy, had wandered away from a family picnic site. Multiple search teams, K-9 units, and helicopter support had been deployed. They'd searched an area of less than 2 square miles for 2 full days without finding any trace. Then, on the 3rd day, the child had simply walked out of the forest on his own, appearing on a trail less than half a mile from where he'd disappeared. He was unharmed, clean, not hungry or thirsty despite having been missing for 48 hours. When asked where he'd been, he said he'd been waiting in the quiet place for someone to come get him. The quiet place. A 7-year-old's description of wherever he'd been for 2 days. The search teams had documented that they'd covered his exit route multiple times. They'd had people standing on that exact trail for hours. Yet somehow, the child had been able to walk out without anyone seeing him until he chose to appear. The official report attributed it to the child being in shock and moving through searched areas without realizing searchers were present. The unofficial notes in Coleman's folder told a different story. Every team member reported feeling like they were searching in circles, like the forest was deliberately confusing them, like the trees themselves were shifting position when no one was looking. Mass hysteria, the official review had concluded. Stress-induced misperception. But 47 trained professionals all experiencing the same hallucination. That stretched the definition of mass hysteria beyond credibility. My phone buzzed with a text from one of the team leaders. Thermal imaging picking up signatures again. Same location as last night, 4 sources, stationary. I grabbed my gear and headed back into the forest. We approached more carefully this time, moving in slowly from multiple directions, maintaining radio contact, ready for whatever we might find. The helicopter held position overhead, its thermal camera locked on the signatures. Still showing 4 sources, the pilot reported. No movement, they're just sitting there. I was 200 yards out when my radio crackled with a new voice, one of the K9 handlers from a flanking team. Miller, the dogs are refusing to advance. All 3 units, simultaneous refusal. They're pulling back hard. What's their behavior? Scared. I've never seen Sadie scared like this. She's a 9-year veteran. She's done building collapses and avalanche work. Whatever she's sensing, it's bad enough to override all her training. I looked at Coleman, who was moving beside me through the dark forest. Your call, she said. We can push forward or pull back. Standard procedure would be to push forward. We had heat signatures indicating possible human presence. Even if the situation felt wrong, our duty was to investigate. But I was also responsible for the safety of my team, and every instinct I developed over 9 years of search operations was screaming that we should not get closer to whatever was generating those thermal signatures. All teams hold position, I ordered. Maintain visual contact with the target area, but do not advance. Pilot, can you get a visual? Negative. Canopy is too dense. Thermal is all I've got. I pulled out my binoculars and trained them on the area where the signatures should be. Through the trees and undergrowth, I could make out a small clearing, possibly one of the circular formations we'd documented earlier. The darkness was too complete to see details, but the space was there, a pocket of openness in the dense forest. And in that pocket I saw movement, just a flicker, barely perceptible, like shadows shifting against shadows. But it was there. 4 shapes, vaguely human-sized, positioned in the clearing as if sitting or standing around a central point. I have visual, I said into the radio, my voice steadier than I felt. 4 possible contacts in the clearing, can't determine identity or status, preparing to make contact. Miller, Coleman, started, but I was already moving forward. I advanced slowly, flashlight in one hand and radio in the other, calling out as I approached. This is the FBI. We're conducting a search and rescue operation. If you can hear me, please respond. No response. Just the shapes in the clearing. Motionless. Waiting 50 yards, 40, 30. Please identify yourself. We're here to help. 20 yards, close enough now to see that the clearing was indeed one of our documented circles, the vegetation arranged in that same unsettling pattern of geometric precision, and in the center, 4 figures sitting in a circle, backs to each other, heads bowed. Robert Griffith, Jennifer, Emma, Lucas, can you hear me? No response, no movement. Just 4 silhouettes in the darkness, perfect and still as statues. 10 yards. I could make out details now in my flashlight beam. Camping clothes, the right sizes for a family of 4, positioned exactly as thermal imaging had shown. But something was wrong with the proportions, with the way they sat, with the complete absence of any human behavior. No breathing, no fidgeting, no reaction to my voice or my approaching light. 5 yards. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, every fiber of my being telling me not to step into that perfect circle. Behind me, I could hear Coleman and 2 other team members approaching, their lights joining mine. Jesus, one of them breathed. Are they? dead. That was the word hanging unspoken in the air. Were they dead? Posed in some elaborate tableaus by a killer with a taste for the theatrical. But bodies don't generate heat signatures. Bodies cool to match their environment. These figures were showing up on thermal imaging as living, heat-producing entities. I took a step into the clearing. The moment my foot crossed the boundary, the figures moved. All four of them, simultaneously, their heads snapping up to face outward, away from each other in cardinal directions, not turning smoothly but moving in a single jerking motion, like puppets yanked by strings. I stumbled backward, my hand going to my weapon. In the flashlight beams I could see their faces now, or where their faces should have been. Instead of features, eyes, noses, mouths, there was just smoothness. Blank expanses of flesh-colored surface. Featureless and wrong and impossible. "Fall back!" I shouted, but I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at these things that wore human shapes but were fundamentally not human. Then they spoke. All four of them simultaneously, in voices that came from no visible mouths. "Why do you keep looking?" The voice was terrible, not because it was harsh or threatening, but because it was perfectly ordinary. A middle-aged man's voice, calm and reasonable, asking a simple question. "We're looking for the Griffith family," I managed to say. "Robert, Jennifer, Emma, and Lucas. Have you seen them?" "We are them. We are here. Why do you keep looking?" "You're not," I started, but Coleman grabbed my arm, pulling me backward. "Miller, look at your hands." I looked down. My hands were shaking, but that wasn't what Coleman was pointing at. The skin on my hands was darkening, mottling with patches of shadow that spread as I watched. It didn't hurt, didn't itch, just spread like ink through water, darkening my flesh in patterns that reminded me of the moss patterns on the forest floor. "Get out of the clearing!" Coleman screamed, yanking me backward. I stumbled back across the boundary, and the moment I did, the shadowing stopped spreading. It didn't recede, but it stopped growing. I looked up at the four figures, which had returned to their original positions, sitting in a circle, backs to each other, heads bowed. And as I watched, they faded. Not quickly, not dramatically, just gradually becoming less distinct, less solid, until they were just shadows among shadows. The thermal imaging confirmed what my eyes were seeing. "Signatures gone," the pilot reported. "All four simultaneously. You guys okay down there?" No. We were absolutely not okay. We retreated to a safe distance, what we hoped was a safe distance, and I examined my hands under proper lighting. The shadowing had stopped at my wrists, leaving my hands marked with irregular patches of darkness that looked almost like bruises, but felt like nothing at all. No pain, no sensation, just a visual change that shouldn't be possible. Coleman documented it with photographs while I tried to control my breathing and make sense of what had just happened. Four figures that looked human but weren't, voices that came from no mouths, skin that darkened in response to what? Proximity, time spent in the clearing, contact with whatever those things were. "We need to evacuate the search area," Coleman said firmly. "Whatever is happening here, it's not natural and it's not safe. We're putting people at risk by continuing." "We have a family of 4 missing," I countered, though my conviction was wavering. "We can't just abandon. Those things weren't the Griffith family. You know that, Miller. Whatever they were something else using the shape of people." I wanted to argue, but she was right. The faceless figures in the clearing hadn't been human, hadn't been alive in any meaningful sense. They'd been something else, something that had responded to our search by manifesting in a form designed to confuse us, to make us question what we were seeing. The forest that doesn't want to be searched. "All right," I said. We pull back for tonight, regroup, and reassess in the morning. But I need to report this up the chain of command. The FBI needs to know what we're dealing with. I made the call at 3 a.m. from the ranger station, speaking to my supervisor in the Seattle office. I tried to keep my report factual and unemotional. Thermal signatures that appeared and disappeared, figures in the clearing that exhibited non-human characteristics, physical effects on personnel who entered designated areas. The response was exactly what I expected. Skepticism, concern about my mental state, suggestions that we were all experiencing stress-induced hallucinations brought on by the challenging search conditions. With all due respect, I said, keeping my voice level, I have photographic evidence of the physical effects. I have thermal imaging footage. I have testimony from over a dozen trained personnel. This isn't hallucination or stress. This is something actually happening in this forest. Agent Miller, I'm going to authorize a medical evaluation for you and any other personnel who've reported unusual experiences. In the meantime, I'm reassigning the search coordination to Agent Brooks from the Portland office. You're to return to Seattle for debriefing. I wanted to argue, but I knew it was pointless. I just reported something that violated every natural law we based our understanding of reality on. Of course, they were going to pull me off the case and have me evaluated. Understood, I said. But whoever you send to replace me needs to be briefed on the dangers. This isn't a standard search operation. We'll take your report under advisement. Get some rest, Miller. You sound exhausted. The call ended, and I stared at the phone in my hand, then at the darkened patches on my skin that served as evidence that something impossible was happening here. Coleman had been listening to my half of the conversation. They're pulling you? They think I'm having a breakdown, which, honestly, I might be. Because what I saw tonight doesn't make any sense. No, Coleman agreed. It doesn't. But that doesn't make it any less real. I spent what remained of the night reviewing footage from the thermal imaging cameras and the body cameras several team members had been wearing. The footage confirmed what we'd all witnessed. 4 figures in the clearing, responding to our approach, speaking without mouths, then fading from existence when we pulled back. But when I tried to make copies of the footage to bring back to Seattle, I encountered the same problem that had plagued previous investigations. The files were corrupted. Not all of them, just the portions showing the actual encounters in the clearing. Everything else was fine. Approach footage, retreat footage, all crystal clear. But the crucial moments, the evidence that would prove what we'd seen, were degraded into digital noise. I tried 3 different methods of copying the files, used 2 different computers, even had our IT specialist attempt a raw data recovery. Every time, the same result. Corrupted files, unusable footage, evidence that refused to be preserved. The forest doesn't want to be searched, and apparently it also doesn't want to be documented. By dawn, Agent Brooks had arrived from Portland, a younger agent, eager and skeptical in equal measure. He listened to my briefing with the kind of polite attention that suggested he thought I was either lying or delusional, probably both. So you're saying the forest is alive? Conscious? Actively resisting the search? I'm saying the evidence suggests the search area is experiencing unusual phenomena that make standard SAR protocols ineffective. Unusual phenomena. He said it like the words tasted bad. Agent Miller, with all due respect, I've reviewed the case file. What I see is a straightforward missing persons case that's been complicated by confirmation bias and possibly some environmental factors that affected equipment function. I don't see evidence of anything supernatural. Then explain the thermal signatures. Explain the figures in the clearing. Likely a combination of equipment malfunction and misidentification under low-light conditions. It happens more often than you'd think. I wanted to show him my hands, The shadowed patches that were still there, still unexplained, but I knew how that would look. Like I was grasping at straws, making physical symptoms fit a narrative I'd constructed to explain a case I couldn't solve. What about the circular clearings, the geometric patterns in the vegetation? Natural formations, possibly created by wind patterns or fungal activity. The Olympic rainforest has numerous examples of unusual growth patterns that have perfectly natural explanations. He had an answer for everything, and they were all reasonable answers. That was the problem. Individually, each strange occurrence could be explained away. It was only when you looked at the pattern, at the accumulation of anomalies, that the explanations started to break down. But trying to convince someone of a pattern when they're determined to see coincidence is a losing battle. I'm ordering a systematic grid search of the area, Brooks continued. Standard protocols, by-the-book procedures. We're going to find this family, and we're going to do it using proven methods. I wanted to warn him. I wanted to tell him that proven methods didn't work in this forest, that the area had a way of confusing searchers and hiding evidence and manifesting things that shouldn't exist. But I could see in his expression that any warning I offered would only confirm his suspicions that I'd lost my objectivity. So I just said, "Good luck," and started packing my equipment. Coleman found me in the parking lot as I was loading my vehicle. "You're really leaving?" "I don't have a choice. I'm officially off the case." "And unofficially?" I looked back at the forest, at the wall of green that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, at the shadows between trees that were deeper than shadows should be. Unofficially, I don't think Brooks is going to find them. I think the forest has already taken them, the same way it took Marcus Dane 8 years ago, the same way it's been taking people for however long this has been happening. And I think it's going to keep taking people until someone figures out what it wants. What it wants, Coleman asked. Forests don't want things. This one does. You said it yourself, it doesn't want to be searched. But I think it's more than that. I think it wants to be left alone, and it's willing to make people disappear to ensure that happens. Coleman was quiet for a moment. Then, "If you're right, if this forest is somehow conscious or purposeful, then why does it leave evidence at all? Why leave the campsite undisturbed? Why create those circular clearings? Why manifest those things for us to see? Maybe it's a warning, or maybe it's a game, or maybe it's testing us, trying to see how far we'll push before we give up and leave. And what happens if we don't leave?" I thought about my shadowed hands, about the figures with no faces, about all the people who disappeared in this forest over the years. I think we find out what happened to the Griffith family, the hard way. I drove back to Seattle under orders to report for medical evaluation. The drive took 3 hours, and I spent every minute of it thinking about what I'd seen, what I'd experienced, what it meant. The medical evaluation was exactly what I expected. Cognitive tests, psychological assessments, questions designed to determine if I was experiencing delusions or hallucinations or some kind of breakdown. I passed all of them because I wasn't crazy and I wasn't seeing things that weren't there. I was just seeing things that shouldn't be there, which is different. The patches on my hands were examined by 3 different doctors. They documented them, photographed them, took skin samples, ran blood tests. Every test came back normal. No tissue damage, no chemical changes, no explanation for why my skin had darkened in irregular patterns. The doctors concluded it was likely a temporary discoloration caused by contact with some plant compound in the forest, possibly an allergic reaction to moss or lichen. Never mind that I hadn't touched moss or lichen in the clearing. Never mind that the discoloration had appeared while I was standing in the clearing, spreading across my skin in real time. Never mind that it was permanent. 3 days later, it showed no signs of fading. They were doing what people do when confronted with something that doesn't fit their model of reality, finding the explanation that required the least adjustment to their worldview, regardless of whether that explanation actually matched the evidence. I understood it. I'd done the same thing countless times in my career, finding mundane explanations for unusual circumstances, explaining away anomalies as misperceptions or equipment failures. But I'd also learned that sometimes the unusual circumstances weren't unusual. They were evidence of something real and disturbing that we simply hadn't encountered before. While I was stuck in Seattle attending meetings and evaluations, the search in the Olympic National Forest continued. I monitored the reports through official channels and through back-channel communications with Coleman and team members I trusted. Brooks had assembled a massive operation, over 100 personnel, extensive technology resources, systematic grid coverage that should have found anything findable in the search area. They searched for 4 days, covering every square foot of forest within a 10-mile radius of the Griffith campsite. They found nothing. No bodies, no additional evidence, no sign that the family had ever existed beyond their abandoned campsite. The circular clearings that Coleman and I had documented were there. Brooks noted them in his reports as unusual vegetation patterns, possibly natural. But he found nothing anomalous about them beyond their geometric precision. The thermal imaging signatures didn't reappear. Whatever had manifested for my team seemed to have decided not to show itself to Brooks's operation. Or maybe it was only visible to people who'd already crossed some threshold of awareness, who'd already acknowledged that something impossible was happening. On the 5th day of Brooks's search operation, he called it off. The official conclusion was that the Griffith family had become lost and disoriented, wandered beyond the search perimeter, and succumbed to exposure in some remote area where their bodies might never be recovered. It was a reasonable conclusion, supported by statistics about missing persons in wilderness areas. It was also completely wrong. I knew it was wrong because 3 nights after Brooks ended his search, I got a call from Coleman at 11 p.m. They found them, she said without preamble. Or rather, they found something. Where? Back at the campsite. Right where they disappeared from, they just appeared, like they'd never been gone. I was in my car within minutes, driving back to the Olympic National Forest. Official orders be damned. The drive through the darkness felt longer than it had before. Every mile waited with anticipation and dread. Coleman met me at the ranger station at 2 a.m. Her face was pale, her hands shaking slightly as she held out a folder of photographs. Brooks and his team had pulled out yesterday, she explained. Left minimal personnel to monitor the site for a few more days, just in case. Tonight, one of those personnel did a routine check of the campsite around 10 p.m. Everything was as it had been. Abandoned tent, cold coffee, scattered belongings. He left, came back 2 hours later, and found this. I opened the folder. The photographs showed the campsite, but it had changed. The tent was still there, but it was zipped closed now. The camp chairs were arranged differently. The food was gone from the table. And sitting in front of the tent, arranged in a neat row, were 4 pairs of shoes, 2 adult-sized, 2 child-sized. Just the shoes. Nothing else. No people, no additional belongings, no explanation for how the shoes had appeared. There's more, Coleman said quietly. Look at the last photo. I flipped to it and felt my blood run cold. Inside the tent, visible through the mesh window, were 4 sleeping bags, and inside each sleeping bag was what appeared to be a person, or the suggestion of a person. Forms that filled the bags in the right proportions, positioned as if sleeping but completely motionless. No breathing, no movement, just shapes in sleeping bags. Did anyone check inside the tent? I asked. No. The ranger who found it called me immediately. I told him to secure the perimeter and not touch anything until you got here. He's been watching from a distance for the past 3 hours. Says the forms haven't moved at all. We hiked to the campsite through the pre-dawn darkness, moving quietly as if approaching a crime scene, which perhaps we were. The ranger who'd discovered the changes was a young guy named Torres, and he looked relieved to see us arrive. "It's exactly as I found it," he said. "I haven't touched anything, haven't even crossed into the campsite proper, just watched from here." The campsite was visible in our flashlight beams, looking almost normal except for its impossible normalcy. Everything was too neat, too arranged, like a stage set prepared for a performance. "I'm going to check the tent," I said, pulling on latex gloves. Miller, Coleman, started, but I was already moving forward. I approached the tent carefully, watching for any movement from the sleeping bag forms inside. They remained motionless, unchanging, silent. Up close, I could see that the sleeping bags were the same ones I'd documented days ago. The Griffith family's gear, untouched since they'd disappeared. I knelt beside the tent entrance and slowly unzipped the door. The smell hit me first. Not decay or death, but something else. That same sweet floral scent I'd encountered in the circular clearing, underlying it a hint of wet earth and ancient vegetation. It was the smell of the deep forest, concentrated and contained within the small space of the tent. Inside, 4 sleeping bags arranged side by side, each one occupied by a form that looked human-sized and human-shaped, but was somehow wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. I reached out and touched the nearest sleeping bag, the adult-sized one on the left, which should have contained Robert Griffith. It was empty, not empty like it contained a body I couldn't see, but empty like it had been carefully arranged to look full. The sleeping bag was stuffed with something. Moss, I realized, pulling back the top. Dense, damp moss packed into the sleeping bag to create the illusion of a person inside. I checked the other 3. All the same. Sleeping bags filled with moss, arranged to suggest human occupancy, positioned as if the family was peacefully sleeping. "They're not here," I called back to Coleman and Torres. "It's just moss, arranged to look like bodies." Coleman joined me at the tent entrance, shining her light inside. "Why would anyone do this?" "I don't think anyone did," I said. "I think something did, the same something that created those faceless figures in the clearing. The same something that's been making people disappear in this forest for years." Torres spoke up from his position at the perimeter. "Agent Miller, you should see this." I backed out of the tent and went to where Torres was standing, pointing his flashlight at the ground just outside the tent's perimeter. Footprints, fresh ones, pressed into the soft earth. 4 sets of them, 2 adult-sized, 2 child-sized, leading away from the tent and into the forest. Leading northeast, the same direction the original tracks had gone. "These weren't here when I first arrived," Torres said. "I'm certain of it. I would have seen them." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the pre-dawn temperature. The forest was playing with us, creating evidence and removing it, manifesting false clues and leading us in circles. It was deliberate, purposeful, designed to confuse and frustrate, or designed to lead us somewhere specific. "Get Brooks on the phone," I said to Coleman. "Tell him we have new developments and we're resuming the search, and tell him to bring everyone he can spare. Miller, you're officially off this case. If you continue, then I continue. I don't care about official status anymore. 4 people are missing, and this forest knows where they are. We're going to follow these tracks and see where they lead." We followed the tracks. Brooks arrived with his full team by mid-morning, skeptical but unable to ignore the new evidence. The tracks were real, clearly visible, leading in a consistent direction away from the campsite. He organized teams, established communication protocols, and began a systematic pursuit of what he called the persons of interest. He still didn't believe in the forest. Still thought we were dealing with natural phenomena and human behavior. I envied him that certainty, even as I knew it was going to fail him. The tracks led us northeast, following the same route the original footprints had taken, leading us deeper into the forest than our previous searches had penetrated. The terrain grew more difficult. Steep slopes, dense undergrowth, fallen trees that required climbing over or around. After 3 miles, we reached another of the circular clearings. This one was larger than the others, approximately 100 feet in diameter instead of 50, and positioned at the bottom of a small valley. The vegetation inside displayed that same geometric precision, but with something new. In the exact center of the circle was what looked like a well or sinkhole, roughly 6 feet across, descending into darkness. The tracks led directly to the edge of this opening, then stopped. Brooks examined the ground carefully. No signs of struggle, no indication of a fall. They just walked up to this hole and stopped. Or went in, I suggested. He looked at me like I was crazy. Into a hole in the ground? A family of 4, including 2 small children, just voluntarily descended into what's probably a cave system. Look at the arrangement of the clearing, I said. Look at how the vegetation has been managed around this opening. This isn't natural, Brooks. None of this is natural. This place was prepared, designed, created for a specific purpose. Caves are natural. Vegetation patterns around geological features are natural. What you're describing is impossible, I know. But so was thermal signatures that appear and disappear. So were the figures in the clearing. So were sleeping bags filled with moss arranged to look like sleeping people. At what point do we acknowledge that the rules we think govern this place don't actually apply? Brooks didn't answer. He was already setting up a perimeter around the sinkhole, calling for rope and climbing equipment, preparing to investigate what he saw as a potential accident scene. I approached the edge of the opening and looked down. My flashlight beam revealed smooth stone walls descending into darkness, with no visible bottom. The walls showed the same unnaturally smooth quality as the tunnel I'd encountered in the circular clearing days ago. Too perfect, too geometric, not carved by water or natural erosion, but by something else. "I'm going down," I said. "You're off this case," Brooks reminded me. "Officially, you shouldn't even be here. Then officially, you never saw me. But I'm going down regardless because this is where the tracks lead, and this is where we're going to find answers." Coleman stepped forward. "I'm going with him." Brooks looked between us, clearly torn between procedure and pragmatism. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. But you both wear safety gear, you maintain radio contact, and you don't take unnecessary risks. This is still a recovery operation, not an adventure expedition." We geared up, climbing harnesses, helmets, multiple light sources, rope systems that would allow us to ascend quickly if necessary. Torres and 2 other rangers were assigned to manage our lines from the surface. As I prepared to descend, Coleman pulled me aside. "What are we really expecting to find down there?" "The truth," I said. "Whatever that is." The descent was slower than I expected. The walls of the shaft were perfectly smooth, offering no handholds or natural features to use for climbing. We rappelled down in darkness, our lights revealing nothing but endless smooth stone and the rope stretching above us. At 50 feet, my light caught something carved into the wall, symbols or glyphs that I didn't recognize, arranged in spiraling patterns that made my eyes hurt to follow. At 100 feet, the shaft opened up into a larger chamber. I signaled Coleman to stop, and we hung suspended in the darkness while I swept my light around the space. The chamber was enormous, cathedral-sized, with a floor that I couldn't see even with my strongest light. The walls were covered in more of those spiral glyphs, and from somewhere far below came the sound of running water. "This is incredible," Coleman breathed. "This has to be a natural cave system, but those markings are not natural," I finished. "Come on, let's keep going." We descended further, our lights barely penetrating the vast darkness of the chamber. At 150 feet, my rope went slack. I'd reached the floor. I unclipped and examined my surroundings. The floor was smooth stone, damp but not wet, and it extended in all directions beyond where my light could reach. The sound of water was louder now, echoing from multiple directions. Coleman landed beside me, and we stood together in the darkness, two small points of light in an underground vastness that shouldn't exist beneath the Olympic rainforest. "Radio check," I said into my handset. Static, then, faintly, "Brooks here. We're receiving you. Status?" "We're at the bottom of the shaft, approximately 150 feet down. We're in some kind of cave chamber. No sign of the Griffith family yet. We're going to explore the immediate area." "Copy that. Stay in radio contact." Coleman and I moved forward slowly, mapping the space with our lights. The chamber appeared to be roughly circular, maybe 200 feet across, with 4 tunnel openings positioned at cardinal points around the perimeter. The tunnels were large, 10 feet high and wide, and showed the same smooth walls as the descent shaft. In the exact center of the chamber was a raised platform, also carved from stone, with what looked like a shallow depression in its surface. I approached it carefully, and as my light illuminated the depression, I saw what it contained. 4 backpacks, 2 adult-sized, 2 child-sized. The Griffith family's belongings, neatly arranged in a row. "Jesus," Coleman whispered. "They were here." "Or their things were brought here," I said, examining the backpacks without touching them. "But look, no signs of distress, no damage to the bags, everything organized and intentional." I photographed everything, then checked my radio. "Brooks, we've found the family's belongings. We're in some kind of constructed chamber underground. Recommend you send more personnel down." Static. Then, "Say again, you're breaking up." I said we found. I stopped. The radio was showing full power, but the transmission was degrading into noise. Coleman tried her radio with the same result. "We're losing the signal. Shouldn't be possible at this depth. The shaft is straight. There's nothing to block the radio waves." Unless something wanted to block them. I examined the 4 tunnel openings, trying to decide which one to explore. Each tunnel was identical in size and construction, offering no clue as to which might lead somewhere productive. Then I noticed something. In front of one of the tunnels, barely visible in the darkness, were footprints. Small ones, child-sized, pressed into a patch of damp earth. "Coleman, over here." We approached the tunnel together, following the small footprints as they led into the darkness. Our radio attempted to maintain contact with the surface, but the static was overwhelming now, drowning out any possible communication. We were alone, descending into darkness, following the trail of a missing family that had somehow ended up in an impossible underground chamber that shouldn't exist. The tunnel sloped downward gently, the walls maintaining their unsettling smoothness. Every 20 feet or so, we'd find another footprint, always child-sized, always singular, like we were following just one person, or like something was leaving just enough evidence to keep us moving forward. After what felt like half a mile but was probably closer to a quarter, the tunnel opened into another chamber. This one was smaller than the first, maybe 50 feet across, and it wasn't empty. In the center of the chamber, arranged in a circle, were 4 sleeping bags, the same sleeping bags we'd seen in the tent, except these ones actually contained people, or things that looked like people. I approached slowly, my hand on my weapon, my light trained on the sleeping bags. As I got closer, I could see that the bags were moving slightly, rhythmically, as if the occupants were breathing. "Robert Griffith?" I called out. "Jennifer? Can you hear me?" No response. Just the gentle rise and fall of the sleeping bags, the quiet sound of breathing in the darkness. I knelt beside the nearest bag and carefully pulled back the top. Inside was Robert Griffith, or something that looked exactly like Robert Griffith. Middle-aged man, dark hair, wearing camping clothes. His eyes were closed as if sleeping, his face peaceful and unmarked. He looked completely normal, except for one detail. He wasn't breathing. The rise and fall I'd seen was the sleeping bag moving on its own, inflating and deflating as if mimicking breathing. But the person inside was completely still. I checked for a pulse. Nothing. I touched his skin. It was cool but not cold, firm but not rigid. He felt like a well-made mannequin, a perfect replica of a person but lacking whatever essential quality separated living flesh from mere simulation. "Coleman, I need you to see this." She examined the other 3 sleeping bags and found the same thing. Perfect replicas of Jennifer, Emma, and Lucas Griffith, positioned as if sleeping, but fundamentally not alive. Not dead either. There was no decay, no injury, no indication of how they'd reached this state. "What are they?" Coleman asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know. Copies? Placeholders? Messages?" I photographed everything, documented the positions and conditions, trying to maintain some semblance of professional procedure even as everything I knew about reality was failing to apply. Then I noticed something else. On the wall, behind the circle of sleeping bags, more of those spiral glyphs. But these ones were different. They seemed to shimmer and shift as I looked at them, reorganizing themselves into patterns that almost resembled words. Coleman saw it too. Are they changing? Either they're changing, or we're seeing them differently. I can't tell which. I stared at the glyphs, trying to find meaning in their patterns. And, slowly, like an optical illusion resolving, they began to make sense. Not as language exactly, but as communication. Ideas and concepts transmitted directly into my mind through some mechanism that bypassed normal sensory processing. The message was simple. "You found them. Now stop looking." I stumbled backward, my head suddenly pounding. Coleman caught me, her face pale. "Did you see that? Did you understand it?" "The forest," I said, my voice rough. "It's telling us to stop searching. It gave us what we were looking for, the Griffith family, or what's left of them, and now it wants us to leave. But they're not really here. Those aren't the actual people, they're just representations, models, the best approximation the forest can create of what we expected to find. It's giving us closure, Coleman. It's giving us bodies we can recover, a resolution we can report, an ending we can accept, and in exchange, it wants us to stop searching." The glyphs had to shifted again, and another concept pressed into my mind. Others. Before. Always stopped. You must stop. "It's done this before," I said. "All the other disappearances, all the other search operations that found nothing, they were all offered the same deal. Find the replicas, declare the case closed, stop looking deeper. And what happens if we don't accept the deal?" The glyphs went still, then blazed with sudden intensity. The concept that flooded into my mind was so overwhelming, so alien, that I couldn't fully process it. But the emotional core was clear. Fury, and beneath it, desperation. The forest didn't want to be understood. It didn't want to be mapped or explained or comprehended. It wanted to exist in the shadows, taking what it needed, giving back just enough to maintain the illusion of natural processes. and those who pushed too far, who refused to accept the surface explanations and kept searching for deeper truth, they became part of the forest. They joined whatever existed in these chambers, contributing to the system that created the replicas and the clearings and all the other phenomena designed to confuse and misdirect searchers. I thought about Marcus Dane, the solo hiker who'd disappeared 8 years ago. I thought about all the other names in Coleman's folder, all the people who'd vanished in this forest over the decades. I thought about the faceless figures I'd seen in the clearing, speaking with Robert Griffith's voice, claiming to be what they'd become. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now." Coleman didn't argue. We backed away from the sleeping bags, from the glyphs, from the chamber that had been prepared as a final answer to our search. We retreated up the tunnel, moving faster than was safe, driven by instinct and fear. Behind us, I heard movement. Not footsteps exactly, but a presence. A disturbance in the air that suggested something was following. The tunnel was changing too, the walls shifting slightly, the path we'd taken becoming unfamiliar. "It's not letting us leave," Coleman said. "It doesn't have a choice. We know the way out." But did we? The tunnel looked the same in both directions, smooth and featureless and endless. Had we been descending or ascending? Had there been a turn we missed? The landmarks I thought I'd memorized were gone or had never existed. We ran. The tunnel twisted and turned in ways it hadn't before, branching into passages that I was certain we hadn't passed. Coleman's light caught glimpses of openings leading to other chambers, other spaces, other parts of whatever network existed beneath the forest. And in some of those chambers, I saw figures. Dozens of them standing motionless in the darkness, all watching us run past. Some looked like the faceless things from the clearing. Others looked fully human, dressed in hiking clothes from different eras, 70s, 80s, 90s, all perfectly preserved, all silent and waiting. The missing, all the people who'd disappeared in this forest over the decades. All of them still here in some form, part of whatever system sustained this place. We burst out of the tunnel and into the central chamber, the one with the raised platform and the descent shaft. I could see our ropes hanging from above, a route to the surface. "Go!" I shouted to Coleman. "Climb!" She clipped into her rope and started ascending, moving fast despite the 150-foot climb ahead of her. I followed, my hands shaking as I secured my climbing equipment, my heart hammering as I looked back at the tunnel we'd just exited. Things were emerging from it. Not quickly, not in a rush, but with terrible patience. The faceless figures from the clearing, the preserved missing from the chambers, all moving together like a single organism, filling the underground space with their presence. I started climbing. The ascent was agony. Every foot gained was a victory. Every yard climbed a desperate race against whatever was below. I didn't look down, didn't check how close the figures were getting. I just climbed, hand over hand, foot over foot, following Coleman's light above me. At 100 feet, my radio crackled back to life. "Miller?" "Coleman, what's your status?" "Ascending," I gasped. "Don't ask questions. Just pull us up, fast." The rope jerked as the surface team began hauling, and I held on as I was dragged upward through the shaft. Below me, I could hear something else ascending, not climbing, just rising, like water filling a well. 50 feet from the surface, I made the mistake of looking down. The shaft below was full of them. The figures, the missing, all the preserved remnants of everyone the forest had taken. They were rising up the shaft not by climbing, but by some other mechanism, drawn upward by invisible force, their faceless heads turned toward me. 25 feet, 15, 10. Hands grabbed me at the surface, hauling me over the edge of the shaft. I sprawled on the ground, gasping, as Brooks and his team pulled Coleman up behind me. What the hell happened down there? Brooks demanded. Your radio's cut out, then we heard, "Seal the shaft," I interrupted. "Right now. Fill it with anything you can find. Rocks, dirt, equipment. I don't care. Just seal it. There are 4 people down there. The Griffith family. They're not down there. Or if they are, they're not alive. Trust me on this. We need to seal that shaft immediately." Brooks looked at Coleman, who nodded. "He's right. There's something down there, and it needs to stay down there." It took 3 hours to fill the shaft. We used everything we could find. Fallen logs, rocks, dirt, even some of our own equipment. We worked with desperate urgency as if we could sense what was beneath us, waiting, patient, willing to give us time to think we'd accomplished something. When the shaft was filled to within 10 feet of the surface, Brooks called a halt. "That's enough. Nothing's getting out of there now." I wanted to believe him, but I knew better. The forest had given us what we came for, the illusion of closure, the replicas of the missing family arranged peacefully in sleeping bags. All we had to do was accept that explanation, declare the Griffith family found deceased, and close the case. Except we'd left the replicas behind. We'd refused the forest's offer. The question was, what would it do now? We hiked out as darkness fell, moving quickly despite our exhaustion. I kept looking back, expecting to see something following us, but the forest appeared normal, just trees and undergrowth and the sounds of evening settling in. Back at the ranger station, Brooks assembled everyone for a debriefing. I told him everything we'd seen in the chambers, the replicas, the glyphs, the preserved figures of the missing. I told him about the message communicated through symbols, about the deal the forest offered, and our refusal to accept it. He listened with increasing skepticism. "Miller, what you're describing, it's not possible. Underground chambers, preserved bodies, communicating glyphs, none of that aligns with any known geological or biological phenomena. I know it doesn't, but that doesn't make it not real. What it makes it is a story, and I need to file a report based on facts, not stories. Here are the facts. We followed tracks to a large sinkhole. You and Coleman descended into what appears to be a natural cave system. You found evidence suggesting the Griffith family may have fallen into the cave and perished. We've sealed the site pending proper recovery operations. That's not what happened. It's what my report is going to say. Because the alternative, that there's some kind of conscious force that takes people and creates replicas and communicates through cave paintings, that's career suicide, Miller. For all of us." I wanted to argue, but I understood his position. He was doing what anyone would do when confronted with something that violated their understanding of reality, finding the nearest plausible explanation and holding on to it like a lifeline. "What about the actual Griffith family?" I asked. "We're just going to tell their relatives that they fell in a cave and we can't recover the bodies." "I'm going to recommend a specialized cave rescue team be brought in for recovery operations. If they find something different than what we described, we'll adjust our conclusions. But right now, the working theory is accidental death in a cave system." The meeting ended with assignments for final documentation and site security. Tomorrow, Brooks would officially close the search phase and transition to recovery operations. The case would move from active to administrative, from urgent to bureaucratic. And the truth about what we'd found would be buried along with the shaft we'd filled. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my motel room, reviewing my photographs and notes, trying to make sense of everything we'd seen. The patterns were there, the circular clearings, the geometric vegetation arrangements, the smooth tunnels, the preserved figures. All of it suggested intelligence, purpose, design. But design implied a designer, and if the Olympic National Forest had a designer, something that consciously managed its internal systems and actively resisted human investigation, then what did that make it? What do you call a forest that thinks, that plans, that takes people and creates replicas and guards its secrets with impossible phenomena? My phone rang at 3 a.m. Coleman's voice was tight with tension. "Miller, you need to get to the campsite, now. What happened?" "The shaft. We didn't seal it well enough." I drove through the darkness with my emergency lights on, breaking every speed limit between Forks and the campsite. When I arrived, I found the entire area illuminated with portable lights, teams of personnel standing at a careful distance from the filled shaft, which was no longer filled. The logs, rocks, and dirt we'd spent hours packing into the opening were scattered around the clearing as if they'd been explosively ejected from below. The shaft was open again, its smooth walls visible in the harsh artificial light. And sitting at the edge of the opening, arranged in a neat row, were 4 pairs of shoes. "They appeared about an hour ago," Coleman said, "along with this." She handed me a piece of paper, standard notebook paper, the kind from Emma Griffith's journal. On it, written in a child's careful handwriting, was a message. "We're happy here. Please stop looking for us. We want to stay." I recognized the handwriting from Emma's journal entries. Either the 9-year-old had written this note before disappearing into the forest, or something had perfectly replicated her handwriting to create a message designed to make us stop searching. "Brooks wants to accept it as genuine," Coleman said. "He's preparing to reclassify the case as voluntary disappearance based on this note. It's not genuine. Can you prove that?" I couldn't. And that was the problem. The forest had gotten smarter, had learned from our refusal to accept the replicas in the sleeping bags. Now it was offering us something more believable, more acceptable. A note suggesting the family had chosen to stay in the forest, perhaps living in the cave system, asking to be left alone. It was plausible enough to satisfy bureaucratic requirements, strange enough to generate some interest, but not so strange that it would trigger deeper investigation. Perfect, really, in its manipulation of human psychology and institutional limitations. "This is a trap," I said. "The forest is giving us an easy way out, a resolution that lets everyone save face and go home. But if we accept it, we're abandoning the Griffith family to whatever exists down there. And we're setting a precedent that next time this happens, and there will be a next time, we'll accept the same explanation." Coleman looked at me with tired eyes. "What's the alternative, Miller? We've searched for over a week. We've found evidence that doesn't make sense, phenomena we can't explain. And now a note that technically resolves the case. What more can we do? We can refuse to give up. We can demand proper investigation of the cave system. We can end our careers fighting against something we can't prove exists. Is that what you want?" No, it wasn't. But I also couldn't accept that a family of 4 had simply vanished into a forest that actively resisted being searched, leaving behind only replicas and messages designed to make us stop looking. Brooks emerged from his command tent with a folder in his hand. "Miller, I'm officially closing this case as of 0600 hours. The Griffith family has been reclassified as voluntary missing persons based on written communication expressing their desire to remain in the forest. Recovery operations are suspended pending any change in their status. That's not what happened, and you know it. What I know is that we've exhausted our search resources without finding conclusive evidence of foul play or accidental death. What I know is that we have a written statement that provides a reasonable explanation for the family's absence. What I know is that continuing this search is unjustified given the available evidence." He handed me the folder. "You're officially released from this case. Thank you for your assistance, but your services are no longer required." I took the folder without opening it. Inside, I knew, would be my formal dismissal from the investigation, recommendations for follow-up psychological evaluation, and suggestions that I take extended leave to recover from the stress of the case. They were burying it, not maliciously, not as part of some conspiracy, but simply because accepting the impossible required more courage than most people had. It was easier to file the paperwork, close the case, and move on to something more comprehensible. I drove back to Seattle as dawn broke over the Olympic Mountains, my hands still bearing the shadow marks from my time in the circular clearing, my mind full of images I'd never be able to unsee. The official report on the Griffith case was filed 3 days later. It concluded that the family had voluntarily entered a cave system in the Olympic National Forest and had communicated their desire to remain there. Search and rescue operations were suspended, the case was closed, and the family was classified as missing by choice. No mention of the replicas in sleeping bags, no mention of the glyphs on the walls, no mention of the faceless figures or the preserved missing or any of the impossible things we'd witnessed. Just a tidy conclusion to an untidy case. I resigned from the FBI 6 weeks after the Griffith case closed. They tried to talk me out of it, offered counseling and reassignment and a chance to work on cases that didn't involve unexplained phenomena. But I couldn't go back to normal investigations. Couldn't pretend that what I'd seen in the Olympic National Forest hadn't fundamentally changed how I understood reality. Coleman left the Forest Service around the same time. We stayed in touch, trading information about new disappearances in the area, documenting patterns that official agencies refused to acknowledge, because the disappearances didn't stop. Every few months, someone would go missing in that section of the forest. Sometimes they'd be found quickly, confused and disoriented, but unharmed. Sometimes they'd never be found at all. And occasionally, their belongings would reappear at their campsites, arranged in ways that suggested they'd simply walked away. I started a blog. Nothing official, just a place to document the cases and share information with other people who'd experienced similar phenomena in forests around the world. Turns out, the Olympic National Forest isn't unique. There are places like it scattered across the globe, areas where the normal rules seem not to apply, where searches fail for reasons that defy logical explanation. Some people call them vortexes or thin places, or dimensional anomalies. I just call them forests that don't want to be searched. The blog attracted attention from researchers, investigators, families of the missing, and people who'd experienced their own encounters with impossible geography. One correspondent sent me a theory that made uncomfortable sense. What if these forests weren't places at all, but entities? What if they were alive in some way we don't understand, conscious in a manner completely alien to human cognition, using their terrain and growth patterns the way organisms use organs and cells? It would explain the geometric clearings, the tunnels that shouldn't exist, the replicas designed to provide closure. It would explain why the forest seemed to react to our searches, adapting its defenses, learning our methods, finding ways to make us stop looking. It would mean the Olympic National Forest wasn't harboring some mystery. It was the mystery, a living thing protecting itself from investigation the only way it knew how. 2 years after the Griffith case, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was, "They're still here." The email contained a single photograph, taken recently based on the metadata. It showed 4 people hiking through a forest, a man, a woman, and 2 children. They were dressed in camping clothes, carrying backpacks, looking like any normal family on an outdoor adventure. The faces were blurred, but the body proportions matched. Robert, Jennifer, Emma, and Lucas Griffith, or something wearing their shapes, still moving through the Olympic forest 2 years after their official disappearance. I showed the photo to Coleman. Could be fake, Could be a different family that happens to match the general description. Could be real, I interrupted. Could be them, or what they've become, still existing somewhere in that forest. If it is them, Miller, what are we supposed to do about it? We tried searching. We found what the forest wanted us to find. We refused it, and it found another way to make us stop. So we just let it keep them. Coleman was quiet for a long moment. Then, maybe they want to be kept. Maybe Emma's note was real, and they've found some kind of existence in that place that's different from what we understand as life, but isn't necessarily worse. Maybe the forest isn't taking people. Maybe it's offering them something, and some of them choose to accept. I wanted to reject that theory, but I couldn't, because I'd seen the replicas in their sleeping bags, looking peaceful and unmarked. I'd seen the message written in Emma's handwriting, asking us to stop. I'd seen the preserved figures in the underground chambers, all the missing people from decades past, existing in some state that wasn't life or death, but something else. What if Coleman was right? What if the forest offered transformation, and some people accepted it? What if the Griffith family had walked into those woods knowing, on some unconscious level, that they might not come back, and had chosen it anyway? It was a disturbing thought, and I'm still not sure I believe it. But it's the only explanation that accounts for all the evidence. The only theory that explains why some searches succeed and others fail, why some people come back and others disappear forever. The Olympic National Forest still operates normally. Thousands of people visit it every year, hiking its trails, camping in its designated sites, enjoying the beauty of one of America's last great rainforests. Most of them have perfectly normal experiences and leave with nothing more than photographs and pleasant memories. But every few months, someone doesn't come back. Someone walks into the forest and encounters something that offers them a choice, whether they recognize it as a choice or not. And sometimes they take it. The search operations continue when needed. Teams of professionals do their best to find the missing, following protocols, and using technology and applying decades of accumulated expertise. Usually, they succeed. Sometimes they fail. And sometimes they find things they wish they hadn't. Things that make them question whether the missing want to be found at all. I still have the shadow marks on my hands. They've faded somewhat over the past 2 years, but they're still visible if you know where to look. Doctors can't explain them, and I've stopped trying to get them to. They're a reminder of what I saw, what I experienced, what I chose to walk away from. Because that's the thing nobody talks about. I could have stayed. When I was in that underground chamber, when the glyphs were communicating their message directly into my mind, they offered me the same choice they'd offered the Griffith family. Join the forest. Become part of its system. Exist in a state beyond normal human understanding. I refused. I chose to climb back up, to return to the surface, to continue living in a world where things made sense and forests were just collections of trees. But the offer stays with me, a whisper in the back of my mind that gets louder when I'm stressed or tired or wondering why I'm still doing this. Because part of me knows the forest was right. Part of me knows that some searches should fail, that some places should remain unknown, that some mysteries are better left unsolved. But I can't stop searching. I can't let go of the idea that the Griffith family is still out there, that the 17 people who disappeared before them are still out there, that everyone who's vanished into that forest over the past century is waiting somewhere in the dark, hoping someone will find them, or hoping someone will finally understand that they don't want to be found. I'm writing this from a motel room in Forks, Washington. Tomorrow morning, I'm going back into the Olympic National Forest. There's been another disappearance. A solo hiker named Grant Morrison who failed to return from a day hike 3 days ago. The official search is winding down, shifting from rescue to recovery. But I got an email yesterday. Another anonymous message, another photograph showing someone walking through the forest who matches Morrison's description. He was standing at the edge of one of those circular clearings, looking back over his shoulder at the camera as if he knew he was being photographed. He was smiling. Coleman told me not to go. She said I'm too invested, too willing to see patterns in coincidence, too ready to believe in a forest that thinks and plans and takes people for purposes we can't understand. She said the shadow marks on my hands are warning enough that I've already gotten too close to whatever exists in those woods. She's probably right, but I'm going anyway. Because Morrison's family deserves to know what happened to him. Because the Griffith family, wherever they are, deserves to have someone remember that they existed. Because all the missing deserve to have someone refuse to accept the easy answers and simple explanations. And because part of me, a part that's been growing stronger since I climbed out of that shaft, wants to go back. Wants to descend into those smooth tunnels again. Wants to see the glyphs and understand their messages. Wants to find out what the forest is really offering, and whether it's as terrible as I think it is, or something entirely different. The tracks always lead somewhere. The question is whether we have the courage to follow them all the way to the end, or whether we should. I don't know when I'll write again. If you're reading this and I haven't updated in a week, assume I found what I was looking for, or it found me. Either way, I'll finally have my answer to what the forest wanted all along.